My wife never expected that cheating would destroy everything for both her and her affair partner. I've always seen my wife as my closest confidant, someone dependable and trustworthy. So it was a shock when she took a wrong turn and faced the consequences. Tonight, I hoped for a bonus, but I had doubts. It was the first time in 3 years I wore my dark blue tuxedo, looking sharp yet feeling out of place. Instead of relaxing in my favorite chair with a drink, I found myself at a fundraiser with colleagues and houses, a big social event in our small Midwest town. I had asked my wife to dress up, and she certainly did, maybe too much. She looked stunning but overly tempting. At 35, she was at her peak beauty, turning heads as she descended the stairs in a revealing maroon dress. Despite her allure, she was mine, and I made that clear. While I'd rather be home, my wife seemed comfortable mingling with the city's elite. She had a natural charm, drawing people to her effortlessly. As I returned from the bar, I found her engrossed in conversation with Senator Thomas Norberto, a charming figure often compared to Tom Sitch. His presence seemed to captivate her like never before, leaving me feeling like a bystander to her infatuation. Noticing they ignored me, I stepped in, politely reminding the senator of my seat. He continued chatting with my delighted wife, so I intervened more assertively, placing drinks between them until he got the message. When he finally acknowledged my presence, he announced he'd leave to find his seat, dismissing me. Fuming, I returned to my place, calling him foolish. My wife defended him, claiming I was rude to a senator. I reminded her of our relationship boundaries, but she rolled her eyes, a move I always disliked. Avoiding a scene, I dropped the matter. Dinner passed and the band resumed playing. I invited my wife to dance, but she refused, leaving me disappointed. While I chatted with others, I kept an eye on the senator, who eventually left for the veranda. Concerned, I found him there, arm around my wife, engaged in a serious conversation. I intervened, but someone stopped me, warning not to mess with the senator. "I'm warning you, that's my wife he's touching," I gritted out as I was pushed back into the ballroom. Demanding he retrieve her, I threatened a scene. He cursed quietly, turning back to the senator. He returned, appearing flustered, claiming ignorance. I grabbed her hand, leading her out. The ride home started in silence, but I knew it wouldn't last. She unleashed, accusing me of humiliating her. I defended my boundaries, reminding her of our marriage. "You're being possessive, crossing a line. You acted like a love-struck teen," she retorted, blushing. She remained silent, conceding my point. Our tension affected the kids, dinner becoming awkward. On Wednesday, she insisted on a serious talk, never a good sign. It ended poorly. She revealed plans to attend another fundraiser with the senator, calling it a non-date. I objected, questioning the appropriateness. She denied any wrongdoing, claiming innocence. I challenged her definition of a date, citing a double standard with her friend Angie. Her reaction confirmed my suspicions. She had issues with Angie, known for her charm. "It's completely different, you know that," she argued, claiming a date with a U.S. senator wasn't the same as a regular date. "There's a big distinction, right, Hess? You can't go out with another guy, we're married, remember?" I reminded her, emphasizing our vows. "You don't own me, Reggie, even though we're married," she retorted. "I can do what I want. I'm not saying you're my property, but you're the mother of our kids. I don't want to break up our family," I pleaded, hoping to reach her. "You're being ridiculous," she dismissed, refusing to acknowledge the seriousness of the situation. I was shocked when Hester appeared in a stunning white gown for her date. Our kids were amazed, asking why she was dressed up. She struggled to explain, but I intervened, bluntly stating the truth. As the doorbell rang, I confronted her with a choice, him or us. She opened the door to a security guard, revealing a black limo outside. "Remember to behave for Daddy," she said before leaving. I assumed it was her, stunned momentarily before focusing on my kids who needed attention. Drowning sorrows in booze wasn't an option. I planned a few FaceTime calls, one to my parents, one to hers. The kids enjoyed chatting with their grandparents. Starting with Hester's parents, I anticipated her recent actions would upset them. We laughed until Hester's absence was noticed. "Where's my daughter, Reggie? Have you hidden her?" my mother-in-law joked. I softly explained Hester was on a date with Senator Thomas Norberto, expecting her return the next day. Shocked, my in-laws couldn't believe I let her go. I tried reasoning with her, emphasizing family neglect, but she seemed convinced it was acceptable. The kids took over the conversation, a welcome distraction. Later, I called my parents, receiving less sympathetic advice from my mother, who recommended a lawyer. After a few calls, I ordered pizza, watched a Disney movie with the kids, and struggled to sleep, distracted by ESPN. In the morning, I made pancakes and bacon, reassuring the kids their mom would return soon, even if it was uncertain. There was no rush to come home after spending the night with another man. The black limo arrived in our driveway around 1 p.m., catching the attention of our kids and neighbors. Usually they'd rush to greet their mom, but this time they stayed put, disappointed by her lackluster appearance. She still wore the same dress from the night before, now wrinkled and tired-looking. I sat in the living room as she entered, showing no eagerness to greet her. "Hey," she greeted, acknowledging our night apart. "Looks like you." "And the kids managed without me," I replied sharply. She headed upstairs, asking for rest and a shower. I raised my hands in mocked surrender, realizing our relationship was over. Now, I focused on making things easy for my kids, avoiding becoming a weekend-only father. The question lingered, could I stay until the kids graduated high school? When Hester finally came downstairs at 7 p.m., I'd already made dinner. I mentioned leftovers in the fridge, receiving a faint smile. The kids sensed tension and kept their distance. Alone, Hester accused me of poisoning their minds. I denied it, highlighting the impact of her actions on them and our neighbors. "I didn't break up our family," she defended, shifting blame to me. "It's up to you. If you can work on your ego issues, we can heal and keep our family together. But if you continue being petty and nasty, we'll have to go our separate ways, and you can be Mr. Part-Time Dad," she warned, catching me off guard. I had expected regret, not resistance and anger. "It's 1 p.m, you idiot," I retorted. "You couldn't get enough last night? Needed a half-day fling, huh?" She paused, avoiding my gaze. "We can get past this and go back to how things were. I know I hurt you and I'm sorry, but I needed this for myself, and I don't regret it," she said unapologetically. "That's a terrible apology if that's what it is," I remarked. "You're only sorry for hurting me, not for anything else." "It was amazing for you," she said defensively. My response matched her conviction. "Your actions betrayed our vows and our family." I recounted how surprised she was when I found her in our guest bedroom. "We can't move forward unless you try," she pleaded. "No, it's too late now," I clarified, locking her out of the room. I slept soundly that night, exhausted from 48 hours of tension. The next morning, I continued our Sunday brunch tradition, making Belgian waffles. "Mom looks rough, like she hasn't slept," Ellie observed as we sat down to eat. "Maybe you should go out more on Friday nights," I suggested. Hess burst into tears and fled to the bedroom, leaving the children puzzled. "Did I say something wrong?" Ellie innocently asked. "No, sweetheart, Mommy probably just missed the waffles," I reassured softly. Later, as I relaxed in my lazy boy, watching the Cubs game, the bedroom door slammed open, and a frantic Hester stormed in, ranting incoherently. "Calm down, honey, I can't understand you with all the drooling and spitting," I remarked. She sobbed, accusing me of making her seem promiscuous to her parents. "What a Kardashian mommy," Elise asked, joining the scene. I exchanged a glance with Hester, who composed herself and sent the kids to their rooms before confronting me. "Tell me," she demanded. As soon as the kids were out of earshot, I saw no reason to hide it from her parents since you were just following a senator to a fundraiser. "If they agree with me, it's not my fault. And by the way, my mom had a similar reaction, so watch out next time she's near." "No, it's not like that," she began, then stopped abruptly. "An amazing experience?" I interjected. If looks could kill, I'd be a stain on the chair, but it didn't bother me much. I gestured for her to move so I could see the TV before she hurried out of the room. For the following 2 weeks, I slept in the guest room. Noticing this, I told the kids that I had a cold and didn't want their mother to catch it. I assumed Eliza had figured out my deception, but she prudently kept it to herself without saying anything. A 7-year-old child demonstrating such impressive intelligence surprised me. One night, an hour after Hess had gone upstairs, I returned to our shared bed and softly climbed in next to her. When the alarm went off the next morning, she snuggled up next to me. "It feels great," she muttered. "It's time to come to your senses." She attempted to touch me, but I stopped her by placing my hand on her forearm and drawing her hand away. I adjusted our position so that we were facing each other on the bed. Certain acts are best performed when you can make direct eye contact. "Before I decide to sleep with you again, you will have to get tested and provide me with the results," I said softly. "You might be willing to trust the senator, but I am not." Tears welled in her eyes. She appeared to be about to say something but then decided not to. Instead, she simply nodded. It revealed to me that she and the senator were not using protection. The scenario was growing more intriguing. Originally, I planned to stay until the kids finished high school, roughly another 14 years until Nate headed to college. My love for them made me willing to endure, but the prospect of long-term closeness absence, especially with an attractive woman under the same roof, seemed untenable. Despite concerns about my reputation, my feelings for her had dwindled over the past 2 weeks. Seeing her leave the bed with sadness no longer stirred me as it once did. My own pain prevented me from offering comfort. Who was she now? The woman I married would have understood my disapproval of her seeing someone else. Hester and I met in college, started dating 3 months later, and married within 2 years. She worked as an actuary, a job requiring precision and honesty, traits that balanced my spontaneity and humor. Despite our differences, I envisioned celebrating 50 years of marriage. Senator Thomas Norberto unexpectedly became a part of our lives. 10 days after returning to our shared bed, Hester handed me an envelope as I came home from work. Inside was her clear bill of health. "Hope you're satisfied," she coldly whispered. "You have no idea how humiliating this was. I may never face Dr. Sanj again." "Not my fault, baby," I replied plainly. "Stay faithful and you won't be embarrassed." She hissed softly but couldn't retort. As she walked away, I pressed on. "How often has the senator contacted you?" she began, but I silenced her with a gesture. With a grimace, she handed over her phone. I found texts and calls from him, but no evidence of further meetings. "Damn it," I exclaimed. "We're on thin ice." "Agreed," she returned seriously, pocketing her phone and heading to the kitchen. That night, she showed me affection in bed, and instinct took over. I didn't have feelings for her, I just fulfilled my needs. I knew she tried to win me back, but I was preoccupied. Hester's abrupt return home sparked neighborhood gossip. Sympathetic looks from men and smirks from women hinted at rumors. One evening, Eliza approached me asking about a women's club. I kept my composure, explaining Mommy's mistake and reassuring her. I hugged her, concealing my emotions, knowing this moment would haunt me forever. A feeling of normalcy gradually returned to our household, at least as far as I could see. Yet, it was a different kind of normal. Whether Hess admitted it or not, things would never revert to how they were before that day. I couldn't fully trust her again, nor could I forgive or forget the profound disrespect she had shown me and our family. Love, to borrow from Tina Turner. What does love have to do with any of this? 6 months later, Hess seemed to grasp something or find the courage to speak up. Following that evening, which she instigated, I turned away from her to sleep, as had become customary since then. Before she said anything, I could hear her crying. Reggie, can we talk?" "What's up?" she asked meekly. "Sure," I sighed. "Could you please turn around?" Her tone conveyed clear irritation as she inquired. I sighed again, trying to mask my frustration, then I turned to meet her gaze. She kept glancing at my eyes. "Do you realize how long it's been since we were close? Say it," I insisted. "You had the courage to do it. Have the bravery to admit it." "We haven't been close since I went on a date," she said. "I noticed," I said. "You satisfy me physically, then sleep. You ensure I'm happy, but it feels purely physical, and you haven't hugged me since. I miss that closeness." "You can't even say those words, baby." I replied, "Your date, you cheated on me with him. Admit it, I'm not stupid. You go on a date and don't come back until the next day. You make it seem cheap and disgusting," she protested. "Yes, we were making love on Saturday night, and it was great. He was gentle and caring, just like you, really. It was an unforgettable experience. That's why we're not making love anymore." "Yes, don't you see? You gave him something that, as you promised, was exclusively mine. And you enjoyed everything. It was unforgettable, as you said. Come on, Ree. It was only 1 night, 2 days. From a statistical standpoint, this is little compared to the hundreds of days we'll spend married. We can forget it, Reg, if you're willing to try," she pleaded. "Thanks for the math lesson, but I've never seen our marriage as a math problem. Would you feel the same if I did it with Mary Jo Young?" "Mary Jo Young," she exclaimed, puzzled. The narrative continues with Reggie and Hester's turbulent relationship, reflecting ongoing emotional tension, unresolved issues, and the struggles of reconciling after betrayal. Mary Jo Young, a divorced blonde with a nice figure, lives close by. Almost every woman on our street watches her closely with her husband. "Wait, are you suggesting you want Mary Jo?" "No way," she exclaimed. "Listen to your inner voice. I never said I wanted Mary Jo, that was you." "I was just wondering how you'd react if I did," I clarified. She looked puzzled until it clicked, then her expression turned angry. "I can read between the lines, no need for words," I replied smugly. She avoided eye contact. "Do you realize, because of what happened, the other girls in the neighborhood bullied Eliza? They overheard their mothers calling you names. It wasn't pleasant," I informed her. Her anger shifted to disbelief at the news. "Eliza never mentioned it," she said, taking a breath, processing. "I'm truly sorry." "Sorry isn't enough. You call the night unforgettable. It was unforgettable, but for betrayal," I declared. With that, I turned away and went to bed, unaware of her next move. Credit is due to Hester. Over the next few months, she committed herself to being an exceptional mother. Traditionally, I had been the primary caregiver for our children, but suddenly Hester took on her share of responsibilities, driving the kids to their various activities and offering them warm support. It made me wonder if she had finally realized that prioritizing our family over her own desires was essential to keeping us together. What a revelation. The children seemed to appreciate the extra attention, but once again, my daughter demonstrated her remarkable receptiveness beyond her 8 years. "Mom is really trying, Daddy," she said to me one day. "I hope she gets a proper apology for whatever she did wrong." I tried to respond with a genuine smile, acknowledging her keen awareness of the world around her. Everything appeared normal in the Wilkerson household. I worked diligently to maintain appearances. As for Hester, she seemed eager to make tremendous efforts, not only to uphold appearances but also to regain my favor. We were two individuals sharing a roof and enjoying certain benefits. Despite her strong desire for normalcy, she expected me to give in eventually. Somewhere within me, remnants of my affection for her remained. However, I couldn't erase 9 years of having her as the focal point of my life. She made things harder for herself by maintaining communication with Senator Prick. I checked her phone calls and messages shortly after her date. She made sure they were clear, yet she didn't realize how easy it was to clone a phone and access all communications. He seemed to keep in touch regularly while she tried to keep him at arm's length, at least for now. "Can we schedule another date soon? I'll be in town," he texted nearly a month ago. "My hubby is still upset from last time," she replied. "I can't risk it." Needless to say, I wasn't impressed. A month later, we marked our 10th anniversary with a family trip to Chuck E. Cheese. The kids had a blast, but Hester didn't. She waited until the kids were playing games before expressing her disappointment with me. "We've always marked our anniversaries just the two of us with a special night. You're altering tradition because you're still holding a grudge. When did you become so petty and small?" she remarked. Once more, the answer to that question is similar to many others about your date. "You did this to me, to us, and to yourself," I replied. "Can't you move past this?" she pleaded. "How often do you two communicate?" I asked directly. She dared to smirk before reaching into her pocket, retrieving her phone and handing it to me. I tossed it high into the air and caught it easily when it fell. "I understand you've been disloyal, but I also acknowledge your intelligence. I bet there's no evidence of your affair on that phone, not since I confiscated it the first time. However, there are records of past texts and calls that you may not have initiated, but I've never heard you explicitly reject the person. Why is that?" Her cheeks flushed as she looked away. "Yes, I knew that was a rhetorical question," I muttered. Amidst this turmoil, my career and my children provided stability, though my colleagues often remarked that I looked like I needed a good night's sleep, or even 6. I was convinced I was developing an ulcer. My hard drink consumption had increased and sleep was elusive. There were nights when I lay awake for hours, staring at my wife, wondering what went wrong. She insisted on loving me, justifying her actions as separate from our relationship. She felt entitled to her night out with Senator Prick and showed no guilt for her behavior, only regret for the injury she caused me. I waited for the other shoe to drop. Surprisingly, my mother-in-law became a source of strength during this challenging time. She repeatedly expressed regret for her daughter's actions. "We apologize, Reggie. We didn't raise her to be this selfish, but I really hope you can find a way to move past this," she said during one of her calls to check on me. I knew what she was doing for the children. As I headed to the kitchen, I grabbed another cooler of beer to take outside. We were having our usual monthly summer picnic in the neighborhood. Outside, we had 2 grills going, offering a variety of hot and cold dishes, fruits, desserts, and drinks. The weather was perfect, sunny and 80 degrees Fahrenheit with hardly a breeze. The gathering had started a few hours ago and was expected to continue for another 5 or 6. These gatherings were always enjoyable for both kids and adults alike. As I moved through the house, I heard female voices from our home office, typically off-limits to non-family. I intended to redirect them to the family room or living area. While most activity happened outside, sometimes someone sought refuge indoors for AC or quiet talks. However, this particular space posed a problem. Yeah, when Reggie takes charge, I can't help but think of him. He's assertive, driven, and focused on his goals. Sometimes I can't shake the memory of that night. "It's something I'll cherish forever," Hester declared to her companion. As I approached the room, I halted in my tracks, my legs weakening, almost stumbling. "Damn, how many people know I'm being betrayed?" I heard laughter. Apparently, there were 3 of them inside. I missed the rest of the conversation as I fought the urge to vomit. I was relieved to reach the restroom before getting sick, emptying everything from the night before, breakfast and lunch. After tidying up, I brought the cooler of beer outside and gave 2 bottles to the guys manning the grills. "Hey, Reg, you all right? You seem a bit off," said John Lazy, casually concerned. "John, I'm good," I replied before drifting away. I stayed quiet for the rest of the gathering. When Hester and her friends returned, I felt eyes on me and noticed smirks aimed my way. Maybe I was losing it, but it seemed like almost every woman at the barbecue was sneering at me. Later that night, after putting the kids to bed and finishing the cleanup, I confronted my wife about my discomfort. She sat on a lounge chair, sipping a wine cooler, looking content. I joined her. "Did anyone show up today who doesn't know about your affair?" I asked sincerely. She looked taken aback. I returned her gaze, pretending innocence. "I might have mentioned it to a couple of girlfriends recently. It was quite the experience," she chuckled. "He's a charming senator I couldn't help but share." "So first you cheat, then you embarrass me in front of your friends. Making every husband aware of your infidelity and branding me as a betrayed man?" I accused. "I'm not unfaithful, and I won't tolerate being labeled as such," she yelled back. "It was just one mistake. I didn't sleep with a stranger in some cheap motel." Her eyes flashed with intensity as she rose from her chair. "I've had enough of this," she declared, her voice growing louder. "You've been playing games for over a year now. Your wife had an affair with another man, a handsome and muscular man. It's time to move forward. I won't be held hostage by your insecurities any longer. If you can't let go, that's your problem. Either file for divorce or face reality. I'm tired of living a lie with you, pretending to be the perfect couple. Decide now." Her outburst caught me off guard, and I sat in stunned silence for what felt like hours. She had already walked away, leaving me alone. Even though I had just regained consciousness, I'm naturally reserved and slow to react, which some, including my wife, interpret as weakness. I seldom panic or act hastily. It pains me to think about not seeing my children every day, but I'm hopeful to salvage my family. I had braced myself for the worst, with a lawyer on standby to fight for me, so I took action. First thing Monday morning, Hester was served with divorce papers at her workplace. Before the day was out, as expected, she was not pleased. About 5 minutes after being served, my phone began buzzing incessantly. Ignoring all her calls, I anticipated the brewing storm upon my return home. Stepping into the house from the garage, Hester exploded in anger. "You fool," she shouted. "Your fragile male ego is bruised and you humiliate me in front of my colleagues. Just as you embarrassed us in front of our friends and neighbors the other day," I retorted. "You practically begged me to file, so I did." She shot me a scornful look, but remained silent. Putting down my belongings, I approached my children for a brief chat, reassuring them of my unwavering love despite us no longer sharing a home starting tomorrow. Elise grasped the situation, having friends with divorced parents, but Nate seemed puzzled. I knew he would struggle, but I was confident my daughter would lend support. Living in a no-fault state made the divorce process seem straightforward. She was expected to receive primary custody of the children, the house, child support, and some alimony. But no, she vehemently contested for some inexplicable reason known only to her. Her lawyer employed various tactics to prolong the proceedings, including insisting on meetings and even suggesting marital counseling. "What's the deal? Have your actions spoken louder than your words? You say you love me, yet you've caused so much turmoil. And then you have the nerve to tell your friends he's the best you've ever had. Why would I want to remain in this marriage if all I get is aggravation? I love my kids, but if I stay with you, they'll only remember an embittered man," I expressed in one session. "But I love you, Reggie. Are you fixated on one incident?" "Yes, he was exceptional, but it was a one-time mistake." "Please forgive me," she pleaded. "I can't, Hess," I replied. "You broke our vows and belittled their importance. I can't overlook that. You made promises to me." I hadn't planned to do this, truly I hadn't, but everyone has a breaking point. The beauty of a two-party political system lies in its contrast. Regardless of how you spin it, Senator Prick belonged to one side, meaning the opposing party would welcome anything that tarnished his reputation. Over a year ago, after Hester's affair, I devised a backup plan. I sought the help of a well-connected lawyer in our city to approach the chairman of the opposing political party, who was eager for anything that could damage the senator's chances of re-election and White House aspirations. Despite promising a hefty monetary reward, they eagerly awaited the information. He had to agree that the evidence would only be revealed if the possessor requested it. Every month, my lawyer kept me informed about the chairman's persistent requests. This month, we were ready to fulfill the chairman's demands. The meeting, my first involvement, was set in my lawyer's office. After introductions, I took out a sealed plastic bag from my briefcase and placed it on the conference table. The chairman's surprise was evident upon seeing the bag's contents. "Dear God," he muttered. "Is that what I think it is?" "If you suspect it's evidence that could end Senator Prick's career," I replied, "then yes." They regarded the bag as if it contained precious gold bars. He refrained from touching it, instead continuing to stare in amazement. "That arrogant woman returned home and went upstairs for a shower," I recounted. "Since she handles the laundry, she probably assumed I wouldn't go through the basket. I waited until I heard the water running before entering the bathroom and finding the underwear at the bottom of the hamper. Everyone these days is familiar with DNA from television. I'm confident that when you test these, you'll find 2 distinct sets. Also, here's her toothbrush for DNA comparison. I assume you'll obtain the senator's sample for matching, unless you already have it," I said, giving the chairman a stern look. He reddened and glanced away, just as I anticipated. I knew he grasped all the complexities of the case, so there was no need to reiterate them. However, I sensed his unspoken question in his expression. "Why?" "Because she lacks the intelligence to realize she shouldn't cross me. She betrayed me, yet she arrogantly assumes I'll eventually forgive her. Now she's flaunting it in front of me. To hell with her and the senators she associates with," I declared. "Your career is finished, Thomas. Damn you, Norberto. You foolish woman. How on earth could your weak husband obtain evidence of our weekend together?" Norberto raged at Hester on the phone a week after my meeting with the chairman. "I do not know. I have no clue what you're talking about," she faltered. The phone call caught me off guard. I used to clone hers. I essentially admitted to her that I had tapped her phone some months ago, and that they hadn't been communicating through that means, if at all. "What did you do wrong?" she asked when I returned her call 90 minutes later. I understood what she meant, but I was feeling vengeful, or so I thought. "I just ordered a pepperoni pizza with garlic bread. Why do you care what I eat?" "Wait, how do you know what I eat?" she snapped at me. From past encounters, I could tell she despised my foolish actions. While she may have seemed to view me as feeble, she knew better. Well, I guess being right about 1 thing out of 2 wasn't too bad. "I'm not sure how you managed it, but it seems you got back at Senator Norberto in some way. He threatened to rough me up for something you did, though he wouldn't say what. Thanks, by the way. My parents are livid. Yours are too. Eliza has been avoiding me, and you can't seem to grasp that what Thomas and I did was unrelated to our relationship." "Yes, about that," I started. Senator Norberto, who was seemingly assured of retaining his seat, suddenly dropped out of the Senate race 8 months before the election, citing significant mental fatigue. With everything else going on in my life, seeking female companionship was the least of my concerns. I hadn't looked at a woman in an appealing way for months until my daughter brought it up. "Daddy, when do you plan to start seeing other women?" Eliza asked casually. My children joined me for the second weekend. "Linda's mom really wants to go out with you," she continued. I was stunned. My jaw must have dropped. Lost in the chaos of divorce, I hadn't thought much about my future beyond taking care of my kids every other weekend and a few weeks during the summer. "Linda's mom brought it up and you're okay with that?" I asked, surprised. "Well, she didn't directly tell me, Dad," Eliza revealed. "She overheard her talking with Annie's mom, but yeah, I'd be fine with it, Dad. I don't want you to be alone, but please, not Marcy's mom. None of us kids liked her." "Kids pick up on things, Dad." Linda's mom, Julie, had been divorced from her terrible husband for about 5 years. She was a charming, lively blonde with curves who still carried the spirited vibe of her old cheerleading days. I had never considered she might be interested in me. When you're married, you don't think about other women's possibilities, at least I didn't. Was I naive? Elise was quietly keeping an eye on me. "It's okay, Dad, I'm almost 9. I understand about divorce and all. Nate and I will be fine. Just take care of yourself." It seemed like I was back. In the dating scene. Linda's mom, Julie, became my first date after re-entering the dating pool, and it felt nice, though somewhat obligatory. I explained to her that emotionally, I wasn't ready for anything serious yet, considering my recent return to dating. She responded with a comforting smile, telling me I didn't owe an explanation to every person I dated. Julie offered valuable advice, almost like a crash course on navigating life with divorced parents. She also mentioned that I would catch the eye of other divorced moms among my children's friends, given my reputation as a good father with a successful career and, well, not unattractive. She blushed a bit when she mentioned the last part. I went on to date Julie and a few other divorced mothers. Sometimes I hardly thought about my ex-wife, Hester, or our past marriage. While I admitted to feeling lonely at times, it wasn't enough to consider reconciling with her. I refused to entertain the idea of her betraying me again. Hester, however, quickly dismissed her affair as a foolish mistake, promising never to repeat it. A foolish mistake? I scoffed. It was poor judgment, a lack of respect, and ultimately selfishness. You prioritized an affair with the senator over your family's well-being. Her mouth opened and closed twice. I sensed her desire to respond, but she remained speechless. I half expected her to persist, despite the fact that she couldn't justify her actions, especially now that contacting the senator seemed pointless. One Saturday during dinner while the kids and I were visiting, my ex-mother-in-law informed me that he had asked Hester never to contact him again. He seemed to think you played a role in his decision to withdraw from the Senate election, and that she didn't intervene enough, she recounted. I raised an eyebrow and continued eating quietly, opting not to comment. A few months later, some guys from work suggested going to a new upscale bar with a dance floor. When I was married, I avoided Thursday evening outings like the plague, but now that I'm single, I found myself going out regularly. 4 of us found a table, ordered drinks, and soaked in the atmosphere of the place. I noticed the 2 women as soon as they walked in. The first woman looked to be in her early 40s, but dressed more in line with individuals over 30, aiming to evoke a youthful vibe. She wore a silk blue shirt, slightly unbuttoned, and a short skirt, accentuating her long, toned legs. With short, dark brown hair and green eyes, she seemed brimming with confidence. On the other hand, her friend seemed out of place in the pub setting, slightly older than her companion, possibly in her early 40s. She exuded refinement and wealth, clad in a sweater and skirt from a high-end store. She radiated elegance and beauty with her shoulder-length silver blonde hair and dark eyes. Seating themselves at a nearby table, the women quickly caught the attention of males, eager to engage or dance with them. I couldn't shake the desire to dance with one of them, particularly the dark-haired woman, who seemed ready for some fun, if not more. She readily accepted dances from every man who approached her. In contrast, the blonde woman danced sparingly and seemed more reserved in her movements. An hour later, I resolved to invite the blonde woman to dance. However, as I approached her table, the brunette grabbed my hand and whisked me onto the dance floor. I became completely captivated by her and forgot about her companion. We danced to upbeat songs until the tempo slowed. When she passionately kissed me, I was entranced. We left the club together and went to my place. Our passion carried over into the bedroom, and that night she shared details of her life. It turned out she and her friend were celebrating her recent divorce. Rosie proved to be an amazing lover, and we dated for about a month before she expressed hesitancy to commit so soon after her divorce. I respected her perspective, and we parted amicably. However, since our initial encounter, I've never had the chance to inquire about her friend, which sparked my curiosity. A few weeks later, I found myself alone in the bar of another upscale establishment, seeking solace with a drink. It wasn't my turn to care for the children, and after a long week, I had the weekend to myself. She entered the room solo, capturing everyone's attention. Her figure resembled Megan Thee Stallion's, with a cascade of rich brown locks framing her face and draping over her shoulders. Striding over in 4-inch stilettos, she settled next to me. Instantly, I felt like I'd stepped into heaven. I scrambled for a clever opening line, but before I could speak, she gazed into my eyes and asked for my drink order. I replied with a sly grin, feeling a twinge of envy at her poise, and my thoughts scattered. "Excellent choice," she purred. A man with impeccable taste, ordering the same undiluted drink as mine. She spent the evening sharing about the boutique marketing company she had founded years ago. Remarkable. Not only was she captivating and intelligent, but she also ran a thriving business. Later, we departed for her charming apartment. She mentioned her preference for lovemaking in her own bed, a common sentiment among women, and delved into the psychology behind it. With her impeccably toned physique, I couldn't believe she was 45. Our first encounter was unforgettable. She was an exceptional kisser, and I felt a connection with her, unlike any since my date with Hester. In just one night, Maria Washington opened up to me more honestly than Hester ever had during our 9-year marriage. Maria confessed her dedication to her career and lack of desire for children, preferring casual relationships with various men. Despite developing genuine feelings for her, knowing a traditional relationship wasn't an option, I agreed to be friends with benefits. For the next year, we met monthly until Maria unexpectedly fell in love with a much younger man. "You're one lucky guy," my ex-mother-in-law would occasionally call me. Despite the divorce, we remained close, bound by mutual understanding and our grandchildren. I still referred to them as Mom and Dad. "Could I ask you a favor, Reggie?" she inquired cautiously. "Of course, as long as it doesn't involve your daughter," I replied. It was a matter of courtesy to take my mother-in-law's request to bring her personal assistant to their upcoming company Christmas party seriously. She's a good-hearted person, Reggie. She went through a divorce a few years ago from an abusive cheater, and I don't think she's dated anyone since. She was hurt, Reggie, and she needs a decent guy to show her that not all men are scoundrels. And I think you're a decent guy, my ex-mother-in-law explained. Isn't it odd when your former mother-in-law tries to set you up on a date? Just one thing, Mom, I interjected. Please tell me she's not boring. Mom caught onto the humor and chuckled. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised, Reggie. You might even let us keep the kids for a night or two, she teased. Mom was spot on. I was pleasantly surprised. Cheryl, or Cherilyn as she preferred, was a delightful bundle of charm with a well-proportioned figure. She was warm without being overly effusive, and she had a delightful habit of wrinkling her nose and squinting her green eyes when she was amused. Equally important, she had a genuinely great personality. I made a point of sticking close to Cherilyn throughout the evening, giving her my full attention, much like I would have with my ex-wife. Cherilyn seemed appreciative of the gesture. While she engaged in conversation, she tended to defer to others, which I suppose was understandable given her upbringing. We sat with my in-laws at a table. Mom was as graceful as ever, while Dad was more reserved at first. I understood his demeanor, but he grew more open as the evening progressed. I surprised Cheryl with my dancing skills, which I had honed to please my ex-wife who loved to dance. Cherilyn also demonstrated proficiency, especially in faster dances, and she complimented me perfectly in slow dances, as if we had been dancing together for years. I savored the feeling of her body against mine as I escorted Cherilyn to the door. She gave me a gentle kiss on the lips and handed me her phone number. I realized I owed my in-laws more time with their grandchildren. After 3 days, I called Cherilyn to ask her out. She agreed to a date the following Friday at one of the city's finest Italian restaurants, followed by an art exhibit at a nearby gallery. Cherilyn dressed more provocatively for our date than she did at the Christmas party, which impressed me even more. We had a wonderful time, and we went out 3 more times before I felt it was time for her to meet my 8-year-old daughter, and for me to meet hers. We spent quality time together, playing mini-golf and enjoying a picnic in a nearby park. Overall, I felt it went smoothly, particularly because the 2 girls developed a strong bond. However, as expected for his age, my son wasn't thrilled because he believed all girls had cooties. Sherry and I met several times a week, and when I had my children, we engaged in family activities together, including all 5 of us. Everything was going well until a few weeks into the new school year when I received an unexpected phone call from Hester. I'm not sure what your girlfriend has been teaching my kids, but your son was in the principal's office today for fighting, and his face is all beaten up. He's been suspended for 3 days, and all he can say is that it all started with this Monique girl he keeps calling his sister. She raged over the phone. First and foremost, you have no right to call my girlfriend names like that. I'll come over after dinner and take Nate out for ice cream. Let's not jump to conclusions until we know exactly what happened, I responded calmly. I heard her sigh before she hung up. After dinner, I picked up Nate and took him to a small family-owned ice cream parlor. As soon as he got into my car, I conducted a thorough visual inspection. He had a cut on his lip and a scratch on the left side of his face. You should see the other guy, Dad, he joked. What's the truth, Nathan Abraham? I responded with his full name to emphasize seriousness. He winced at the mention of his first and middle names. A kid was bullying Mo. I told him to leave my sister alone. He threw the first punch, then I punched him hard. They say I broke his nose. It made a loud crack, and there was blood everywhere, he explained, trying to hide a grin. The boy who bothered Mo was 2 years older than Nate. Will Mo tell me the same story? I asked. Absolutely, Dad. I wouldn't have punched him if he hadn't thrown the first punch. I was just defending Mo. You always tell me to look out for Allie, so I figured it applied to Mo too. She's really small, Dad, Nate said. Nate had a valid point. Monique inherited her mother's petite stature, making her at least half a head shorter than most of her peers. I had always stressed to Nate the importance of looking out for his sister, and it seemed he now saw Monique as part of his family. It was fascinating how the innocence of childhood sometimes outweighed the wisdom of experience. I commend you for protecting Mo, but let's keep it between us, I told him. I'll speak with the principal and see what can be done. You might want to update your mother on Mo's status. It seems you and Elise haven't been keeping her fully informed about my life, which I appreciate. However, it might be better coming from you and Elise, I said. I mentioned that my 7-year-old understood completely. Children mature quite quickly these days. And Dad, when are you and Cher tying the knot? She's amazing, you know, Nate added. As I mentioned earlier, kids grow up fast, and he was right. It was time to make a commitment to that woman. The following day, I reached out to the principal. The school had a strict zero-tolerance policy for fighting, regardless of whether it was self-defense. However, they also had a zero-tolerance policy for bullying. As a result, the aggressor received a 6-day suspension following interviews with witnesses. Although I disagreed with the policy, I advised Nate not to contest his punishment manually. Furthermore, I assured him of my support and promised to propose to Sherry as soon as I could afford the ring. Things got complicated when Hester discovered Sherry was Mom's personal assistant and that Mom had scheduled their first meeting. "What on earth, Mom? Aren't you supposed to be on my side?" Hester yelled later, according to Mom. "There's no your side," Mom replied. "He's not coming back to you. You completely messed that up, so why let a good man go to waste? Sherilyn is a wonderful woman and a great friend. She deserves someone like Reggie." Mom described Hester's scream as horrifying as she recounted the incident. While both my children enjoyed Sherry's company, my daughter in particular seemed to admire her nurturing demeanor towards me. Sherry had a natural inclination to fulfill my desires, making me feel like the master of my domain. This, in turn, encouraged me to treat her like my queen. Elise seemed to enjoy witnessing the affectionate banter between Sherry and me. "I'm not sure if you two are endearing or nauseating," Elise remarked one day, "but I enjoy being around to witness it." A couple of months later, our lovemaking wedding only included our 3 children, my parents, and my ex-in-laws as guests. The court clerk who officiated the ceremony was surprised when my ex-mother-in-law stood as Sherry's maid of honor. "It's quite a story," I chuckled when she inquired. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition to come from the classic British comedy ensemble Monty Python's Flying Circus, but truth be told, nobody expects an inquiry from a federal marshal either. I was taken completely by surprise when 2 officials entered my office on a Monday morning. It seemed the authorities were upset about a certain former senator's altercation and subsequent injury in the restroom of an upscale restaurant in Houston, Texas. My name, along with that of several other aggrieved husbands, emerged as potential suspects. "I can't say I'm sorry to hear about the senator's troubles. Nobody, and I truly mean that, deserves it more," I remarked to the disgruntled marshals. "You do realize that the fool slept with my then-wife almost 4 years ago? If I had any intentions, wouldn't I have acted long before now?" I retorted with heavy sarcasm. However, the grilling from the federal agents was just the beginning. A week later, a reporter from the Associated Press showed up at my office seeking details about the aforementioned incident. It appeared he had somehow obtained a confidential roster of 26 women the senator allegedly had affairs with during his time in office. At this point, several individuals were aware of Hester's rendezvous with the senator, though I certainly didn't publicize it. Over the years, Hester likely disclosed it to more people than I did, as she took pride in her achievement. However, I couldn't help but wonder about her level of pride when news of the senator's misconduct emerged, implicating her as one of his lovers. "Why did you disclose that to him?" She practically yelled at me over the phone. "I didn't," I said. "He informed me that your name was on the senator's roster. All I did was confirm the accuracy of your inclusion on the list. I wasn't going to fabricate to spare you from embarrassment." "Promiscuous? I am not promiscuous," she screamed at me before I ended the call. "I must confess," I chuckled. I also entertained the thought of taking an extended vacation out of town when the news article broke. She messed up, literally, and yet I was going to suffer an embarrassing fallout as well. Sherry talked me out of that notion. "Don't engage in any confrontation. Stick to the truth. She cheated on you. You divorced her. Move on," Sherry advised. Unfortunately, my children were going to endure verbal bullying for the remainder of their school years. We would be addressing the fact that their mother was a self-centered cheater for years to come. I also sympathized greatly with my ex-in-laws, who had become close friends of ours after the article came out. We invited them to stay with us in the house we had purchased for a couple of weeks. During that time, they mostly stayed indoors and avoided answering their phones. "I adore my daughter," you grasp the parental emotions. "But I'm deeply ashamed that she thought it acceptable to engage in promiscuous behavior," Dad confessed. No father wants his daughter to be perceived in that manner. As time elapsed, the scandal dissipated, and life resumed its usual course. Gradually, my children began spending more time with Sherry, Monique, and me at our house. It wasn't formal, but our home naturally evolved into the neighborhood kids' gathering spot. Initially, Hester objected, but I believe things smoothed over. Furthermore, I ensured that Elise and Nate maintained open communication with Hester to prevent her from accusing me of alienating her children again. Mom and Dad's frequent visits helped alleviate tensions when the kids were with me. We seldom discussed Hester. Although she remained their mother, she became an ex in my life. They also refrained from mentioning her out of respect for Sherry, whom they now referred to as Mom. Initially, I sensed discomfort from Hester's parents when the kids started calling Sherry Mom, but that soon faded as they had been close to Sherry even before our marriage. Amidst the upheaval in my life and my family's, I paid scant attention to Hester's affairs. I knew she occasionally dated based on the kids' remarks, but I was startled when Elise announced one afternoon that her mother was engaged. A wave of sadness engulfed me for what might have been, then I felt a comforting embrace envelop me, and my sorrow swiftly transformed into joy for what I now possessed.
Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The autumn wind howled across Maine's Crystal Lake, sending ripples across its usually tranquil surface. Earl Peterson guided his truck down the familiar gravel path leading to his family's lakeside estate, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. His father's call about the vintage Chris Craft boat had been brief and uncharacteristically tense, something that set off warning bells in Earl's mind. Thomas Peterson had maintained that boat with religious dedication for 3 decades. "Dad, what's wrong with the boat?" Earl had asked over the phone. Thomas's voice had wavered. Just come quickly, son. Please." That hesitation, that tremor in his father's usually steady voice, it wasn't right. Earl had learned to trust his instincts during his years in special operations, and right now, every nerve-ending screamed that something was terribly wrong. As he rounded the final bend in the driveway, the first red flag appeared. The property's security cameras, which he'd personally installed last spring, hung motionless. Their recording lights, which should have been blinking steady red, were dark. Earl slowed the truck, scanning the property with practiced precision. His heart nearly stopped when he spotted his wife Courtney's black Mercedes parked behind his parents' car. She told him she would be in Boston all week for a real estate conference. Earl had even helped her pack, listening to her enthusiastic chatter about networking opportunities and potential high-end property listings. "Just think, darling," she'd said, kissing his cheek. "This could be our big break into luxury real estate." Now her presence here, on a Wednesday afternoon when she should have been 2 states away, sent ice through his veins. Earl parked his truck out of sight, behind the old groundskeeper's shed. As he approached the house, his military training took over. Each step deliberate, his breathing controlled. The front door stood ajar, afternoon sunlight spilling across scattered papers in the entryway. Family photos lay face down on the hardwood floor, their frames cracked. Earl's hand instinctively reached for a weapon that wasn't there, his combat reflexes surging to the surface. From the direction of the boathouse came muffled voices. Earl moved silently across the lawn, years of tactical training guiding his movements. As he drew closer, his wife's voice carried clearly through the autumn air, cold, calculating, and utterly foreign to the woman he thought he'd married. "You two better clear your son's inheritance soon so I can divorce him and take a bigger cut." Courtney's words dripped with contempt. "After that, I'll retire rich, thanks to him. Don't you dare tell anything to your son, or my lover will make sure you won't be around much longer." Earl positioned himself near the boathouse window, his back pressed against the weathered wood. Through the slats, he could see his mother Lynn's tear-streaked face, her usually immaculate silver hair disheveled. Thomas sat beside her, cradling his right wrist, which was beginning to show signs of bruising. The sight of his father, a proud man who'd built their construction company from nothing, looking defeated sent rage coursing through Earl's body. Standing beside Courtney was a hulking figure Earl didn't recognize, a muscular man with crude prison tattoos snaking up his neck. Later, Earl would learn this was Glenn Green, but in that moment, all he saw was a threat to his family. The man's stance and the slight bulge under his jacket suggested he was armed. What caught Earl's attention next made his blood boil. Around Courtney's neck gleamed his mother's sapphire necklace, a Peterson family heirloom passed down through 4 generations. Lynn had worn that necklace at Earl's wedding, promising to give it to his future daughter one day. "The money's not enough," Courtney was saying, her manicured fingers toying with the stolen necklace. "Maybe I should take this too. It's probably worth more than that pathetic boat your husband wastes so much time on." "That necklace belongs to my daughter," Lynn's voice shook with anger despite her fear. Glenn stepped forward, his shadow falling across Lynn. You don't have a daughter, old lady. Just a son who married the wrong woman. His laugh was ugly, matching the cruel twist of his mouth. Thomas struggled to his feet. You won't get away with this. Earl will. Earl will what? Courtney cut him off with a sneer. Cry about it? Please. Your son's so blindly in love with me, he wouldn't believe you if you told him the sky was blue. She leaned closer to Thomas, her voice dropping to a threatening whisper. Now, where are the rest of the documents? Earl's hand slipped into his pocket, activating his phone's recording feature. With his other hand, he sent a prearranged SOS signal to his old military teammate, James Rollins, now a detective with the state police. Years of friendship had taught them to trust such signals without question. Through the window, Earl could see the boathouse table clearly now. Half-empty coffee cups sat scattered across its surface, a faint white residue visible around their rims. The wall safe, hidden behind a vintage boating poster, gaped open, decades of family documents spread across the floor like fallen leaves. The transfer papers need both our signatures, Thomas was saying, his voice stronger now. And I won't sign anything under duress. Glenn's response was immediate and violent. He grabbed Lynn's arm roughly, yanking her to her feet. Your choice, old man. Sign the papers, or your wife takes a swim in the lake. That was the moment Earl's restraint snapped. No one threatened his family. No one. He burst through the boathouse door, his presence announcing itself like a thunderclap in the enclosed space. Let her go. Now. The look of shock on Courtney's face would have been almost comical under different circumstances. Glenn reacted instantly, shoving Lynn aside and reaching for his concealed weapon. But Earl was already moving, his military training taking over. The fight was swift and brutal. Glenn had prison yard tactics and raw strength, but Earl had years of special operations training. As Glenn drew his weapon, Earl grabbed a hammer from his father's toolbox, using it to disarm the larger man. The gun went flying, skittering across the floor and under a workbench. Glenn charged like a bull, but Earl sidestepped, using the man's momentum against him. The impact sent Glenn crashing into the boat repair equipment, tools clattering around him like metallic rainfall. Earl, baby, this isn't what it looks like. Courtney's composed facade cracked, fear creeping into her voice. Your parents, they're confused. They've been. Shut up. Earl's voice was ice. Just shut up. Courtney's fear transformed into something darker. You have no idea who you're dealing with, she snarled. The Castellano family will. The sound of police sirens cut through the air, growing closer by the second. Earl kept his eyes on Glenn, who was struggling to his feet, blood trickling from a cut above his eye. Your parents deserve this, Courtney spat. All their wealth, wasted on that stupid boat and their precious family name. We just helped ourselves to what should have been yours anyway. The only thing I deserve, Earl replied calmly, is watching you both go to prison. The wail of police sirens grew louder, but Glenn wasn't finished. With surprising speed, he produced something from his jacket, a military-grade smoke grenade. The action revealed his own service background, a detail that would later prove crucial to the investigation. Now, Glenn shouted, pulling the pin. Thick smoke filled the boathouse within seconds. Earl heard his mother cough, his father calling out in confusion. Through the chaos, he caught a glimpse of Courtney and Glenn disappearing through a hidden route behind the boathouse, one that led directly into the dense Maine woods. Dad, get Mom out, Earl commanded, trying to follow the escapees. But the smoke was too thick, and his priority had to be his family's safety. By the time the smoke cleared, Detective Megan Ruiz was leading a team of officers onto the property. Earl found his parents on the lawn, where emergency medical technicians were examining Thomas's injured wrist. They had this planned, Earl told Detective Ruiz, his arm around his shaking mother. The escape route, the smoke grenade. This wasn't amateur hour. Ruiz nodded, taking notes. We'll find them, Mr. Peterson. But right now, I need you to tell me everything you know about your wife. As Earl began to speak, more details emerged. Courtney's true identity, Angela Martinez, a woman wanted in 3 states for elder fraud and marriage scams. Glenn's real name was Marcus Green, a dishonorably discharged Marine with documented connections to organized crime. The family's lawyer, Stephen Fry, arrived with suspicious speed, his BMW racing up the gravel drive before Earl had even called him. Unknown to the Petersons, he'd been working with Courtney for months, helping orchestrate their financial destruction. As police searched the property, evidence of a sophisticated criminal enterprise emerged. Forged documents lay hidden in the boat's storage compartments. Offshore account details were discovered tucked inside old maintenance logs. Most disturbing were the traces of substance found in the coffee cups, proof that Thomas and Lynn had been systematically gave them substance to make them more compliant. Your father's signature on these documents, Detective Ruiz said, holding up a stack of papers and evidence bags. They're good forgeries, but they're forgeries nonetheless. They've been working on this for months. Earl stood in the boathouse doorway, watching the sun set over Crystal Lake. The vintage Chris Craft boat bobbed gently at its mooring, a silent witness to the day's events. His mother's sapphire necklace was gone, along with decades of family history and trust, but Earl Peterson was far from defeated. "Detective," he said, turning to Ruiz, "I want to be involved in every step of this investigation." "That's not standard procedure," she began. "Neither is what happened here today." Earl's voice was firm. "They didn't just try to steal our money. They tried to destroy my family. This isn't over." As crime scene technicians combed the property and his parents gave their statements, Earl made a silent vow. Courtney, or Angela, or whatever her real name was, had chosen the wrong family to target. She thought she knew him, thought she had him figured out. She was about to learn just how wrong she was. The autumn wind continued to blow across Crystal Lake, carrying with it the promise of coming winter. But for Earl Peterson, it carried something else, the certainty that this was only the beginning. The mahogany-paneled study in the Peterson estate underwent a dramatic transformation in the week following the lake house incident. Earl methodically stripped the walls of their family photos, replacing generations of smiling faces with surveillance feeds and criminal network charts. The vintage sailing maps that Thomas had collected now served as backdrops for financial flow diagrams and suspected criminal connections. "Sir, FBI is here," announced Officer Chen, one of the local police officers assigned to guard the property. Earl looked up from the stack of financial records he'd been reviewing. Special Agent Benita Sullivan strode into the study, her dark suit and precise movements marking her as federal law enforcement before she even showed her credentials. Behind her came a team of specialists carrying cases of equipment. "Mr. Peterson," Sullivan said, extending her hand, "your case just landed on my desk. This goes far beyond a simple inheritance dispute." Earl gestured to the evidence boards he'd assembled. "I've been piecing things together. My wife, Angela Martinez," Sullivan interrupted, spreading photographs across Thomas's antique desk. "Though that's just one of her aliases. Your wife isn't just a con artist, Mr. Peterson. She's the mastermind behind the Castellano family's elder fraud division." Earl leaned forward, studying the photos. They showed Courtney, no, Angela, at various high-end art galleries across New England. In each image, she wore a different designer outfit, but her predatory smile remained constant. "Those art galleries she frequented?" Sullivan continued. "Money laundering fronts, the real estate conferences, planning sessions for their next targets. We've been building a case against the Castellanos for years, but they're careful. Your wife's mistake was getting greedy with your family." A tall man in wire-rimmed glasses stepped forward, carrying a laptop. "Howard Spence, Forensic Accounting," he introduced himself. "We've been tracking financial patterns across the eastern seaboard. Each transaction, each art sale, leads back to the same network." Spence pulled up complex financial diagrams on his screen. "See these transfers? High-end art pieces moving between galleries in Boston, New York, and Miami. Perfect for laundering money. The Castellanos were doing small-time elder fraud before your wife showed them how to steal entire family legacies." Earl studied the patterns, his military training helping him spot the tactical elements in their financial strategy. "They move the money like they're moving troops," he observed. "Creating diversions, false trails." "Exactly," Sullivan nodded approvingly. "Your background might be crucial in understanding their operation." At that moment, Detective Ruiz entered with fresh coffee for the team. Your parents are settled at the mountain cabin, she reported to Earl. Full security detail in place. Earl nodded, grateful for the update. His parents were recovering at a secure location, their testimony proving invaluable. Each day revealed more about the methodical nature of Courtney's operation. She'd prepared their coffee every morning, playing the dutiful daughter-in-law while lacing their drinks with a carefully measured cocktail of a legal substance. Glenn's presence wasn't just for muscle, Sullivan explained, pulling up his military record. Marcus Green, discharged for conduct unbecoming. He used psychological warfare techniques, subtle threats, implied violence. More effective than outright force for maintaining control. Earl remembered the bruise on his father's wrist, his mother's tear-streaked face. His jaw tightened. What's our next move? We build an airtight case, Sullivan declared. The Castellanos have connections in law enforcement, judiciary, even banking. We need overwhelming evidence. As if on cue, Howard Spence's laptop pinged. Another transfer just went through. They're moving art pieces again, a Monet this time, valued at $2.3 million. Earl walked to the window, looking out at Crystal Lake. The vintage Chris Craft boat bobbed gently at its mooring, a reminder of everything his family had nearly lost. They think they've won, he said quietly. Let's prove them wrong. The arrival of Stephen Fry at FBI headquarters marked a turning point in the investigation. The family lawyer sat in an interrogation room, his expensive suit wrinkled, his usual confidence shattered. Faced with mounting evidence of his crimes, he began to crack. Start from the beginning, Agent Sullivan commanded, while Earl watched through the one-way glass. How did you get involved? Frey's hands trembled as he reached for the water glass before him. The Castellanos approached me 2 years ago. Small favors at first. Expediting some property transfers, backdating a few documents. The money was... He swallowed hard. The money was too good to resist. And Angela Martinez? Sullivan pressed. When did she enter the picture? She found me, Fry admitted. Knew about my work with the Castellanos. Said she had bigger plans. He leaned forward, voice dropping. The Castellanos own 6 retirement homes across 3 states. Courtney, Angela, she'd identify wealthy targets, then create circumstances forcing them to move in. Once isolated, the families never stood a chance. Earl felt a hand on his shoulder. Travis Miner, his former team leader and now an FBI consultant, stood beside him. You okay? I trusted him, Earl said quietly. He handled my parents' estate planning for 20 years. Travis nodded grimly. That's how they operate. They don't just steal money. They steal trust. Inside the interrogation room, Fry continued his confession. Judge Jeffrey Matthews was key. He approved all the fraudulent property transfers through his court. The bank managers, they're all in on it too. They facilitate the movement of stolen funds. Take their cut. Sullivan spread photos across the table, surveillance shots of Glenn at various locations. Tell us about Green's role. He's their enforcer, Fry explained. Ex-military, like you suspected. That smoke grenade from the lake house? Military grade, stolen from Camp Lejeune. They've got connections to arms trafficking too. Earl's military training proved crucial in analyzing these tactical elements. Working with Travis, he began mapping Glenn's patterns. The escape route at the lake house, Earl pointed out. The smoke grenade deployment. These aren't random actions. No, Travis agreed. This is military protocol, adapted for criminal use. Look at the timing of their movements, the coordination. They've got training. Sullivan joined them in the observation room, her expression grave. We just uncovered something disturbing. The Castellanos have hired a contract killer, Ronald Chavez. His target? She met Earl's eyes. You. Earl absorbed this information without flinching. Why haven't they moved yet? Because of your behavior, Sullivan explained. They're waiting for you to self-destruct. Our surveillance shows they're monitoring you, expecting the betrayed husband routine. It's buying us time. Then let's give them what they expect, Earl said, a plan forming in his mind. As Winter's grip tightened around Crystal Lake, Earl Peterson began his carefully orchestrated downward spiral. He made sure he was seen at local bars, playing the part of a broken man perfectly. My wife, he slurred one night at the Rusty Anchor, loud enough for the Castellano surveillance team at the corner table to hear. Everything was a lie. Everything. The performance convinced crime family observers that he posed no threat. Reports filtered back to Courtney and Glenn in Montreal, where Agent Sullivan's team tracked their movements and monitored their communications with the Castellanos. He's falling apart. Courtney's voice came through on an intercepted call. Just like I said he would. Pathetic. Earl's apparent collapse was a masterpiece of deception. Even as he staged public meltdowns, he worked tirelessly with the FBI task force. Each drunken rant was followed by hours of strategic planning in the command center. The breakthrough came when Thomas and Lynn, now clear-headed and determined, returned to the lake house. Under FBI supervision, they reached out to Stephen Fry, appearing to seek reconciliation. Mr. Fry, Thomas said during a recorded meeting, his voice heavy with fabricated defeat. We've been thinking about what Courtney said. Maybe it's time to simplify our estate. Fry, now working as an informant, passed the information up the chain. The Peterson parents, apparently broken by their son's decline, were ready to sign over everything. Earl's team crafted their lure with precision. They leaked information about a hidden Peterson family trust, supposedly untouched by the previous attempts at theft. The vintage Chris Craft boat, still waiting in the boathouse, would play a crucial role. The boat's restoration required importing rare parts from Europe, Earl explained to Sullivan as they reviewed the plan. Perfect cover for moving money across borders. And you're sure they'll bite? Sullivan asked. Earl smiled grimly. Courtney always said that boat was my father's biggest waste of money. She won't be able to resist using it against us. As Christmas decorations began appearing along Crystal Lake shore, surveillance teams tracked Courtney and Glenn crossing back over the Canadian border. The Castellanos, convinced of their prey's vulnerability, authorized one final operation to seize the Peterson estate. Every phone call, every text message, every email flowed through FBI monitoring systems. From his command center in the study, Earl watched the pieces fall into place. Agent Sullivan stood beside him, both of them watching their targets move into position on multiple screens. You realize this will determine more than just your family's fate, Sullivan said quietly. If we can break the Castellanos' elder fraud operation, we save countless other families, Earl finished. I know. Outside, snow began to fall on Crystal Lake. The vintage boat waited in its boathouse like a silent witness, ready to play its part in the coming storm. Earl Peterson, the man Courtney had dismissed as a lovesick fool, stood ready to spring the trap that would bring down an entire criminal empire. The final act was about to begin, and this time, Earl Peterson would be the one writing the ending. Heavy snow blanketed Crystal Lake on Christmas Eve, transforming the Peterson estate into a winter fortress. The security cameras, now fully operational but carefully disguised as malfunctioning, recorded every detail as a black SUV crept up the driveway at 11:47 p.m. Inside the FBI command van parked half a mile away, Earl Peterson watched Courtney and Glenn's approach on multiple monitors. They really think you're passed out drunk in Portland, Agent Sullivan observed, adjusting her tactical vest. The FBI had orchestrated every detail, including Earl's very public breakdown at a Portland bar earlier that evening, actually performed by an undercover agent, while the real Earl prepared for the operation. Courtney always did underestimate me, Earl replied, his voice cold. She thought I was just some lovesick fool she could manipulate. Through the surveillance feeds, they watched Glenn approach the front door. His prison tattoos stood out starkly against the falling snow as he worked on the new lock, exactly the one the FBI had installed, knowing his preferred picking methods. Inside the lake house, Thomas and Lynn sat at their kitchen table, appearing vulnerable but wired with state-of-the-art surveillance equipment. Thomas's hands shook slightly as he arranged the financial documents, a performance for the cameras he knew were watching. Remember, Earl's voice came through their hidden earpieces. Let them think they have the upper hand. The more comfortable they feel, the more they'll reveal. The front door swung open. Glenn entered first, his boots tracking slush across the floor. Courtney followed, dressed in an expensive designer coat that probably came from some other family's stolen fortune. Her stiletto boots clicked against the hardwood as she surveyed the room with predatory satisfaction. You should thank us, Courtney said, her smile cold as she regarded the elderly couple. Earl's drinking himself to death in Portland. We're here to protect your interests. She nodded to Glenn, who produced a thick stack of documents from his jacket. Lynn flinched convincingly at Glenn's approach, not entirely an act, given their last encounter. We didn't expect anyone tonight, she stammered. That's the point, isn't it? Courtney laughed, helping herself to Thomas's prize scotch without asking. The best gifts are always surprises. Consider this our Christmas present to you. We're going to help you clean up the mess your son made of everything. From the command van, Earl watched his former wife pour herself a drink like she owned the place. Agent Sullivan touched his arm lightly. She's getting comfortable. That's exactly what we want. The tactical teams were already in position. One group waited in the vintage Chris Craft boat, while others were concealed in the surrounding woods. Every room in the house had been wired for sound and video, creating an inescapable web of surveillance. Glenn prowled the room restlessly, his instincts clearly troubled by something he couldn't quite identify. We should do this quick, he muttered to Courtney. Something doesn't feel right. Relax, Courtney snapped, settling into Thomas's favorite chair. Look at them, they're terrified. And Earl? She laughed again, the sound like breaking glass. He couldn't even figure out I was using a legal substance on his parents' coffee for months. Trust me, everything's under control. The next hour proved to be a masterclass in hubris. Courtney, believing she faced only two defeated seniors, began to revel in her moment of triumph. The hidden cameras captured every word as she detailed her operation with smug satisfaction. You know what your real problem was? She asked, swirling the scotch in her glass. You were too trusting. Too wrapped up in your precious family name and traditions. The Castellanos used to think small nursing home scams, insurance fraud. I showed them how to steal entire family legacies. Thomas leaned forward, playing his role perfectly. How many others? Oh, dozens, Courtney preened. The art galleries were brilliant, if I do say so myself. Who looks twice at $1 million painting changing hands? Money laundering at its finest. And the retirement homes? Perfect hunting grounds. Rich old people, all lined up like dominoes. Glenn's unease grew as Courtney talked. He kept glancing at the windows, the tactical training he'd corrupted now warning him something was off. But Courtney was too caught up in her moment of glory to notice. Your son actually did me a favor, she continued, pulling out her phone. His pathetic drinking made this so much easier. I just need to call Judge Matthews about expediting these final transfers. Her eyes fell on the vintage boat's restoration paperwork, carefully placed on Thomas's desk. The documentation suggested an insurance value 3 times the boat's actual worth, perfect for money laundering. As Courtney reached for the papers, a familiar voice cut through the room. Federal agents insist on proper documentation, Earl said calmly, stepping out from the study doorway. Especially for international transactions. Glenn's reaction was instant and violent. He reached for his weapon, but FBI teams were already swarming in from every entrance. Earl's former military unit, now FBI tactical operators, had him surrounded before his hand could close on the grip. Agent Sullivan personally approached Courtney, whose composure had finally shattered. Angela Martinez, she announced formally, you are under arrest for fraud, money laundering, conspiracy, and multiple counts of elder abuse. Across 3 states, synchronized raids began. Judge Matthews was taken into custody during his Christmas Eve dinner, the turkey still steaming on his dining room table. The Castellano family leadership found their holiday gathering interrupted by tactical teams. Retirement home administrators, corrupt bankers, and art gallery owners all received similar Christmas Eve surprises. In the lake house, Courtney made one final attempt at control. You can't prove anything, she snarled at Earl. It's our word against 2 senile old people. Agent Sullivan smiled, producing a tablet displaying multiple video feeds. Actually, we have your entire confession from tonight, plus evidence from every property transfer, art sale, and retirement home scheme for the past 5 years. Mr. Fry was quite thorough in his documentation. The evidence was overwhelming. Years of recorded conversations and transactions. Detailed financial records from phrase files. Testimony from dozens of victims. International banking records. documented connections to organized crime, proof of judicial corruption, medical records showing systematic illegal substance of victims. Earl stepped closer to Courtney as agents cuffed her. "You thought I was weak," he said quietly, "that I'd fall apart without you. But you never really knew me at all." "This isn't over," Courtney spat, but her voice trembled. "Actually," Earl replied, "it is." The following Christmas transformed Crystal Lake into a symbol of justice and healing. The Peterson estate hosted a gathering of families, all victims of the Castellano organization who had reclaimed their stolen legacies. The vintage Chris Craft boat, fully restored, bobbed gently at its dock. Earl and Agent Sullivan, their relationship forged in the crucible of justice, announced their engagement during the gathering. Their connection had grown naturally from mutual respect and shared determination, nothing like the manipulation that had characterized Earl's first marriage. Thomas and Lynn, fully recovered from their ordeal, had established a foundation to protect elderly citizens from financial exploitation. The family's construction business thrived under Earl's leadership, now specializing in security systems for senior communities. In federal prison, Courtney began serving her 30-year sentence, her designer clothes exchanged for prison orange. Glenn's cooperation with authorities earned him 15 years in a separate facility. The Castellano organization's leadership faced life terms, while Judge Matthews wrote his memoirs from a minimum security compound. The Peterson family story became a catalyst for legal reform, leading to strengthened protections for elderly citizens and harsher penalties for inheritance fraud. The art galleries were transformed into legitimate businesses under new ownership, while the corrupted retirement homes found new, ethical management. Earl kept the recordings from that Christmas Eve, not out of vindictiveness, but as a reminder. The leather portfolio still sat in his father's study, now containing documentation of their victory rather than their victimization. The lake house stood proud against the Maine winter, its security cameras bright and functional, protecting a family that had turned victimization into victory. On quiet evenings, Earl and Benita Sullivan took the Chris Craft out on Crystal Lake, its restored engine purring across waters that had witnessed both betrayal and redemption. The boat, like the Peterson family, had emerged stronger from its trial by fire, a testament to the power of justice served cold on a winter's night. "What do you think about a spring wedding?" Benita asked one evening as they watched the sunset from the boat's deck. "Here by the lake?" Earl smiled, thinking of everything the waters had seen. "Perfect," he said. "This place has seen enough darkness. Time for some light." The vintage Chris Craft carried them back to shore, its wake spreading across Crystal Lake like ripples of justice. Steady, unstoppable, and finally complete. Epilogue. 5 years later. The federal maximum security facility in Colorado stood stark against the mountain backdrop as Earl Peterson walked through multiple security checkpoints. 5 years had transformed him. His military bearing remained, but success and vindication had added confidence to his stride. "Prisoner 24601 is ready," the guard announced. Courtney Martinez, formerly known as Angela Martinez and Courtney Peterson, sat shackled to the interview table. Prison had stripped away her designer facade. Her once immaculate hair was streaked with gray, her manicured hands now rough from mandatory labor. "Come to gloat?" she asked, but the old venom had drained from her voice. "No," Earl replied, setting down a thick folder. "I'm here because 3 more of your previous victims came forward. The FBI needs to verify some details." Courtney's shoulders slumped. Her empire had crumbled completely in the years since her arrest. Each month seemed to bring new victims forward, each revelation extending her sentence. The 30-year term had grown to life without parole as evidence of more crimes emerged. "How's Glenn?" she asked, attempting sarcasm. "Still enjoying his deal?" Marcus Green committed suicide in his cell last year, Earl informed her dispassionately. His conscience finally caught up with him. Before he died, he provided evidence about 7 more families you targeted. Did you really think we wouldn't find them all eventually? The news of Glenn's death seemed to age Courtney another decade in moments. Her last ally was gone. The Castellano organization had disowned her, her illegal fortune was confiscated, and her web of lies had unraveled completely. Justice blooms. Back at Crystal Lake, the Peterson estate had become a symbol of resilience and redemption. The lakeside property now housed the Peterson Foundation for Elder Justice, a nationally recognized organization dedicated to preventing financial exploitation of seniors. Thomas and Lynn Peterson had transformed their trauma into purpose. Another group today? Earl asked his mother as he arrived home. Lynn, her silver hair now a crown of dignity, was arranging chairs in the converted boathouse conference room. Financial advisors from across New England, she confirmed. Your father's giving his presentation on spotting fraud indicators. 5 years later, and they still want to hear our story. The foundation had helped recover over $100 million in stolen assets for elderly victims nationwide. Thomas Peterson's experience had made him an expert at detecting financial exploitation schemes. His presentations to law enforcement and financial institutions had become legendary in the industry. The vintage Chris Craft boat, still gleaming at its dock, had become part of the foundation's logo, a symbol of preservation and justice. Earl and Benita Sullivan Peterson used it regularly, taking their 3-year-old twins Emma and James for sunset cruises. Ripples of change. The case's impact had rippled far beyond Maine. Judge Jeffrey Matthews, serving 20 years in minimum security, had become a cooperating witness in judicial corruption cases across the country. His detailed testimony had led to the removal of 12 corrupt judges and the overturning of hundreds of fraudulent property transfers. Stephen Fry, after serving 3 years and providing extensive cooperation, had been released and now worked as a consultant for the FBI's Elder Fraud Division. His insider knowledge proved invaluable in dismantling similar schemes nationwide. The corrupted retirement homes had been completely reformed under new management, with the Peterson Foundation providing oversight. The art galleries, once fronts for money laundering, now operated legitimately, with several hosting exhibitions of art created by fraud survivors as therapy. Detective Megan Ruiz had been promoted to lead a specialized elder fraud task force, often collaborating with the Peterson Foundation. James Rollins, Earl's former military teammate who received his initial SOS, had joined the Foundation's security division, training law enforcement in protective tactics for vulnerable seniors. A new chapter. Earl's construction company had evolved into Peterson Security Solutions, specializing in protecting senior communities and financial institutions. The technologies they developed had become industry standards, implemented in retirement facilities across the country. Benita Sullivan Peterson now headed the FBI's New England White-Collar Crime Division, her experience with the Peterson case informing her approach to complex fraud investigations. Their marriage had become a partnership in justice, their shared dedication to protecting others strengthening their bond. The twins, Emma and James, were growing up surrounded by the legacy of their family's triumph over betrayal. The lake house's security cameras still functioned perfectly, but they now watched over family gatherings and foundation events rather than criminal conspiracies. The final ledger. During her years in prison, Courtney had received multiple offers for book and movie deals about her crimes. She had accepted none, her silence a final punishment, as she watched the Peterson family's story of resilience inspire others through authorized documentaries and educational programs. The Castellano crime family had never recovered from the scandal. Their leadership died in prison, their criminal empire dismantled, their ill-gotten assets redistributed to victims. The investigation sparked by the Peterson case had led to the collapse of similar operations in 3 countries. The leather portfolio in Earl's study, once containing evidence of victimization, now held thank-you letters from families they had helped, photographs of reunited relatives, and documentation of lives rebuilt. The Foundation's annual Christmas gathering had become a celebration of healing, with hundreds of survivors sharing stories of recovery and renewal. Legacy of Crystal Lake. 10 years to the day after Courtney's arrest, Earl stood at the lake's edge with his children. Emma, already showing her mother's investigative mind, asked about the story behind the boat's name. Justice Wake? Sometimes, Earl explained, watching the sunset paint Crystal Lake in shades of victory, bad things happen to good people. But what matters is how we respond. This boat, this lake, this family, we chose to fight back. Not just for ourselves, but for everyone who needed protection. The Peterson estate had become more than a home or foundation headquarters. It stood as a beacon of hope, proving that justice, while sometimes slow, was unstoppable when pursued with determination and integrity. Inside the house, Benita prepared for another foundation board meeting. Thomas and Lynn played with their grandchildren in the restored boathouse. The security cameras blinked steadily, their red lights now symbols of protection rather than intrusion. Crystal Lake's waters lapped gently at the shore, carrying decades of stories, of betrayal transformed into triumph, of victims becoming protectors, of a family that refused to be broken. The vintage Chris Craft boat bobbed at its mooring, its wake long since settled but its impact eternally rippling outward, touching lives far beyond the shores of a lake in Maine. As dusk settled over Crystal Lake, Earl gathered his family for their evening boat ride. The tradition had begun as therapy but had become a celebration. Each voyage reminded them that while evil might make waves, justice created lasting currents that changed the very course of rivers. The Peterson legacy, forged in betrayal but tempered by justice, had become a foundation for others to build upon. In the end, Courtney's attempt to destroy the family had instead created an indestructible force for good, proof that sometimes the greatest victories come from the battles we never chose to fight, but refused to lose. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there. Welcome back and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the study windows of the Knox family estate, where Remington Knox stood surrounded by 3 generations of family history. His fingers traced the spine of another leather-bound journal as he searched for the elusive tax documents he needed. The colonial house's weathered oak shelves held more than just books. They contained the legacy of the Knox men who had raised their families within these walls. Rem paused at his great-grandfather's section, noting how the leather bindings had darkened with age. As he pulled one volume forward, something shifted behind it, a manila envelope, wedged deep between the books. It was thick, obviously full of documents, and bore no markings on its exterior. "That's odd," he muttered, carefully extracting it. The envelope wasn't sealed, and its contents slid out easily into his hands. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the first page, then widened in disbelief. Adoption papers. Multiple sets, professionally drafted and ready for signatures. Rem's heart skipped a beat. He and Evangeline had never discussed adoption, not once in their decade of marriage. Their twins, Aurora and Sebastian, were weeks away from their 8th birthday. The thought that she might want to expand their family should have brought joy, but something felt off about these papers. He moved to his grandfather's mahogany desk, spreading the documents across its polished surface. The formatting looked strange for adoption papers, too many clauses about custody and legal guardianship. Before he could read further, voices drifted up through the heating vent from the kitchen below. "I'm telling you, Mom, everything's under control." Evangeline's voice carried clearly through the old ductwork. "Rem will sign them without a second thought. He's so trusting, he won't even read past the first page." Rem froze, his hand hovering over the papers. A muffled response from his mother-in-law was followed by Evangeline's laugh, a sound that now seemed hollow, stripped of its usual warmth. "Of course Declan and I have thought this through. Once Rem signs, the kids will legally be with their real father. My darling brother-in-law has waited long enough, don't you think?" The words hit Rem like physical blows. His fingers clenched, crumpling the edge of the document he held. The implications of what he just heard threatened to overwhelm him, but years of corporate negotiations had taught him to control his reactions. He forced his breathing to steady, his mind already shifting into analytical mode. Looking down at the papers with new understanding, he noticed details he'd missed in his initial shock. The careful wording about transfer of parental rights. The specific mentions of medical and educational decision-making authority. These weren't adoption papers, they were a trap, designed to strip him of his rights to his own children. And what about the foundation board meeting next month? His mother-in-law's voice became clearer as she moved closer to the vent. "Please, Mother. Once this is done, the Knox family trust will be secure. Declan has everything planned. Rem won't know what hit him until it's too late." The sound of a cabinet door closing downstairs snapped Rem out of his focused listening. He gathered the papers with mechanical precision, returned them exactly as he'd found them, and carefully shifted the journals back into place. Years of boardroom battles had taught him the value of appearing unchanged when you discovered your opponent's hand. He glanced at his reflection in the window. Not a hair out of place, not a sign of the earthquake that had just shaken his world. Good. He needed that control now more than ever. His phone vibrated in his pocket, a text from Aurora's teacher about the upcoming school play. His children. His twins. A wave of cold fury washed over him, but he channeled it into clarity. They needed him thinking, not reacting. The study door opened, and Evangeline appeared, wearing the smile that had once made his heart race. Now he saw the calculation behind it. "Darling, did you find those tax documents?" She leaned against the doorframe, the picture of casual concern. "You've been up here for ages." Rem allowed himself a small frown of frustration. "Not yet. This filing system of Dad's is like a puzzle box. Why don't you take a break? The kids want to show you their new science project before dinner." "Good idea." He moved toward the door, noting how she stepped aside just enough to let him pass without touching her. Had she always done that? What are they working on now? "Something about family genetics," she said, following him down the hall. "They're fascinated by inherited traits." The irony might have broken him if he hadn't already shifted into battle mode. Instead, he merely nodded. "Sounds interesting. Lead the way." As they descended the stairs, Rem's mind was already mapping out his next moves. He'd learned long ago that in business, the person who struck first usually lost. Information was power, and he needed more of it. He watched Evangeline walk ahead of him, her designer heels clicking on the hardwood floors. She'd always moved like a queen in their home, but now he saw it differently, not regal, but entitled. She thought she was sacrificing a pawn in her game. She had no idea she'd just awakened a knight. After dinner, when Evangeline took the twins to their piano lessons, Rem returned to the study. The manila envelope remained exactly where he'd left it, but this time he bypassed it entirely. His target was the journal he'd been examining when he'd first made his discovery. His great-grandfather's handwriting filled the pages with tales of business dealings and family matters, but Rem wasn't interested in the distant past. He pulled out volume after volume until he reached the most recent ones, the journals his father had maintained until his death 5 years ago. The last journal felt different. Rem ran his fingers along its spine, finding a slight bulge near the binding. Careful examination revealed a letter tucked deep inside, the paper yellowed with age. His father's distinctive handwriting covered the page. "Son, there's something you need to know about Evangeline and Declan. I've been gathering evidence. If anything happens to me..." The rest was torn away, the paper jagged where it had been ripped mid-sentence. Rem stared at the fragment, memories of his father's death flooding back. The car accident had never made sense. His father had been an exceptionally careful driver, especially in rain. The investigation had been surprisingly brief, the case closed despite several unanswered questions. Mr. Knox? Maria, their housekeeper, appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Declan is here to see you." Rem quickly secured the letter in his inner jacket pocket. "Thank you, Maria. I'll meet him in the living room." Declan Knox strode into the room like he owned it, which Rem now realized might have been the plan all along. His brother's tailored suit and confident smile had once seemed charming. Now they struck Rem as the costume of a con man. "Working late, brother?" Declan's tone was casual, but his eyes darted around the study. "Just organizing some old files." Rem gestured to the scattered papers on his desk. "What brings you by? Can't a man visit his favorite brother?" Declan dropped into a leather armchair. "Actually, I wanted to discuss the Foundation's new tech initiative. I've got some promising startups lined up." "I'm sure you do." Rem leaned back, studying the man he'd grown up with. Had there always been that predatory edge to his smile? "But it's late, and I have an early meeting tomorrow. Why don't we discuss it at the office?" A flicker of something annoyance? Concern? Crossed Declan's face. "This is rather time-sensitive, Remington. These opportunities won't wait forever. Neither will my meeting." Rem stood, a clear dismissal. "We'll talk tomorrow." After showing Declan out, Rem returned to the study and locked the door. He pulled out his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. Sterling Bishop. Sterling, it's Rem Knox. Remember that favor you owe me from our Harvard days? A chuckle came through the speaker. The one where you kept me from getting expelled? Hard to forget. I need your help. Quietly. Rem's voice was low, even though he knew Evangeline was still out with the twins. How much access does your position at the FBI give you to financial records? Enough to be dangerous. What are we looking for? Everything you can find on my brother's tech startups. Shell companies, offshore accounts, anything suspicious. And Sterling? Include my wife in that search. A pause. Rem, are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. After hanging up, Rem sat at his desk and opened his laptop. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before he composed a carefully worded email to the twins' doctor, requesting their complete medical records, including all tests from birth. The response came faster than he expected. Dr. Carter's reply was brief, but the attachment made Rem's blood run cold. It was a DNA test from the twins' birth, one he'd never seen before, one that had been deliberately kept from him. A knock at the door made him close the laptop quickly. Yes? Daddy? Aurora's voice came through the wood. Can you help me with my science homework? Rem took a deep breath, forcing his features into a calm expression before opening the door. His daughter stood there, notebook in hand, her dark curls falling around her face just like his mother's had. Of course, sweetheart. He lifted her onto his lap as he sat back at the desk, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. What are we studying? As Aurora chatted about genetic traits and Punnett squares, Rem held her a little tighter than usual. Looking at her now, he could see pieces of himself in every feature: his mother's curls, his father's eye shape, the Knox family chin. Daddy? Are you okay? You're squishing me. Sorry, princess. He loosened his grip slightly. Just thinking about how much you remind me of Grandma Cordelia. Mommy says I look more like Aunt Patricia. Mommy's wrong about a lot of things, Rem muttered, then caught himself. Now, about those Punnett squares. The next morning, Rem arrived at his office earlier than usual. He needed time to think, to plan, to begin gathering the threads that would unravel this conspiracy. The city spread out below his corner office, the same view he'd had for the past decade. But today, everything looked different. His assistant, Janet, knocked and entered with his usual coffee. Mr. Knox? Mr. Bishop is on line 1. He says it's urgent. Thank you, Janet. Hold all other calls. Rem waited until the door closed before picking up the phone. What did you find? Sterling's voice was grim. You might want to sit down for this, Remington. Those shell companies your brother uses for his tech startups? They all trace back to accounts opened the month before your wedding. And Evangeline's signature is on every single one. Rem's grip tightened on the phone. How many? 7 companies, 3 offshore accounts. The paper trail is complicated, but it's there if you know where to look. Rem, there's more. The initial funding for these accounts came from a transfer the day after your father's funeral. The pieces were starting to fit together, forming a picture that made Rem's stomach turn. Can you send me everything you've found? Already encrypted and on its way. But Rem, be careful. This level of financial manipulation. These people aren't playing around. As if on cue, Rem's laptop chimed with a new email. Not Sterling's report. This was from Dr. Carter, responding to his request for the twins' complete medical records. The attached files included birth certificates he'd never seen before, listing an attending physician he didn't recognize. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, he read aloud. What was that? Sterling asked. The attending physician on my children's birth certificates. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood. Does that name appear anywhere in your financial investigation? The sound of rapid typing came through the phone. Give me a minute. Well, one of those offshore accounts? Registered to A.T. Blackwood. Can you find out who this doctor is? Already on it. More typing. Rem, there's no record of a Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood ever working at the hospital where your kids were born. But I'm finding something else. Hold on. Rem's office door opened, and Evangeline walked in, immaculate in a designer suit. Darling, we need to talk about those papers I left in your study. I'll call you back, Rem said into the phone, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. He looked up at his wife, seeing her clearly for the first time in years. What papers would those be, dear? Evangeline's smile was practiced, perfect. The adoption papers, silly. I know we haven't discussed it, but I really think expanding our family would be wonderful. The twins are at such a good age for a new sibling. Rem leaned back in his chair, allowing himself to appear thoughtful. Interesting timing. I was just reviewing some old family documents myself. Oh. A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. Yes. It's amazing what you can find in old journals. Letters. Birth certificates. He watched her face carefully. Tell me, Evangeline, who is Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood? The color drained from her face for just a moment before she recovered. I don't recall the names of all the doctors from 8 years ago, darling. Why do you ask? No reason. Rem smiled, the same smile he used when closing a hostile takeover. About those papers, why don't you bring them to my office later? We can go through them together. Actually, there's no rush. Evangeline backed toward the door. We should discuss it at home, when we have more time. After she left, Rem picked up his phone again. Sterling? Find everything you can on Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood. And Sterling? Add my father's accident to your investigation. I have a feeling it wasn't an accident at all. He turned to his computer, pulling up the files Sterling had sent. As he read through the evidence of years of manipulation and deceit, his resolve hardened. They had underestimated him, mistaking his trust for weakness. That was their first mistake. It would also be their last. The grandfather clock in the Knox mansion struck midnight as Rem sat in his study, reviewing Sterling's preliminary findings. The documents painted a disturbing pattern of financial manipulation, but pieces were still missing. His phone lit up with an incoming call. Cordelia Knox. His mother rarely called this late. Mother? Son. Cordelia's voice trembled, unlike her usual composed manner. I need to tell you something. It can't wait until morning. Rem switched on the recording function of his phone, a habit from years of business dealings that now served a darker purpose. What's wrong? It's about Declan. She drew a shaky breath. He came to see me today. He was drunk, angry. He started talking about things that have been happening since your wedding day. But it goes back further than that, all the way to college. Rem's grip tightened on the phone. Tell me everything. I found letters in the attic last week, while looking for your father's old files. Letters between Declan and Evangeline, dated before your engagement. They've been planning this for years, Remington. The marriage, the children. All of it. What do you mean, planning? Your father suspected something wasn't right. That's why he was investigating that night. The night of the accident. Cordelia's voice cracked. He called me just before he left, said he had proof of something involving Declan and the company finances. He never made it home. The implications settled like ice in Rem's veins. Did Declan say anything about that night? Not directly, but he made threats when I confronted him about the letters. Said accidents happen in families all the time. Said I should remember what happened to your father before asking too many questions. A pause. Rem, there's more. Check the twins' birth certificates. Look at the attending physician. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, Rem said. The name already burned into his memory. How did you? I've been doing some investigating of my own. Mother, I need those letters. They're gone. Declan took them. But I remember what they said, every word. They talked about the Knox Trust, about needing legitimate heirs, about how easy it would be to manipulate you because you'd never suspect your own brother. Rem's jaw clenched. What exactly did they want from the trust? Everything. The foundation, the company holdings, the family estate. But they needed a Knox heir to access it. That's why they chose you. Declan couldn't qualify on his own after that scandal in college. What scandal? The one your father hushed up. Declan was selling company secrets to competitors. Your father gave him a choice, resign from the company or face charges. That's when the plotting started. They needed you, your position, your children. A door slammed somewhere in the house, and Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper. Someone's here. I have to go. But Rem, be careful. They're desperate now, and desperate people do dangerous things, Rem finished. Mother, stay somewhere else tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going, not even Patricia. After hanging up, Rem sat in the darkness of his study, pieces falling into place. His father's death, the suspicious timing of his engagement, the way Evangeline had rushed their wedding. His phone buzzed with a text from Sterling. Found something big about Blackwood. Call SAP. Sterling's office at the FBI Forensic Accounting Division hummed with the sound of computers. Maps of financial transactions covered one wall, red strings connecting shell companies to offshore accounts. Rem stood before them, studying the complex web his brother had woven. Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, Sterling said, pulling up a file on his screen, licensed to practice medicine in 3 states until 1995, when his license was revoked for falsifying medical records. Want to guess his real name? Rem leaned closer to the monitor. Show me. Dr. Theodore Blake, Evangeline's father. He changed his name after the medical board investigation, started practicing under Blackwood. But here's where it gets interesting. Sterling pointed to a series of transactions. That offshore account funding Declan's startups? Registered to T. Blackwood. The same signature appears on both the medical license application and the bank documents. He's been helping them all along, Rem muttered. But why risk practicing medicine under a false name? Because they needed someone they could trust to falsify the birth records. Sterling pulled up another document. I had our forensics team analyze the twins' original birth certificates. The paper's authentic, but the information isn't. These were created using stolen hospital letterhead and credentials. Rem's phone buzzed. A text from Evangeline. Where are you? We need to discuss those papers. Ignore it, Sterling advised, noting Rem's expression. We're close to something big here. Look at this pattern of transfers from Blackwood's account to a series of holding companies. Each one corresponds to a major event in your life. Your engagement, wedding, the twins' birth. They were marking their progress, Rem realized. Each step of their plan. Exactly. And there's more. Remember that medical board investigation that cost him his license? It wasn't just about falsified records. He was performing unauthorized fertility treatments, manipulating genetic testing results. A knock at the office door interrupted them. Sterling's assistant entered with a stack of files. The hospital employment records you requested, sir. And Mr. Knox, your brother's secretary, called. He's trying to reach you about an urgent foundation matter. Tell him I'm in meetings all day. Rem turned back to the records. What else did you find about these fertility treatments? Sterling spread the files across his desk. According to the medical board investigation, Blackwood was accused of tampering with paternity tests, falsifying birth records, even performing unauthorized procedures. He lost his license, but most of the records were sealed as part of a settlement. Can you unseal them? Already working on it. But Rem, there's something else you should see. Sterling pulled up a security camera photo. This was taken at your father's accident site 2 hours before the crash. Recognize anyone? The grainy image showed 2 figures in the rain. One unmistakably Declan, the other a woman whose stance and build matched Evangeline's exactly. They were there, Rem said quietly. They killed him. We can't prove that yet. But combined with the financial evidence, Sterling gestured at the wall of connections. We're building a RICO case. Fraud, conspiracy, maybe even murder. But we need more time to make it airtight. Time is the one thing we don't have. Rem showed Sterling the adoption papers he'd photographed. They're making their move now. Back in his office, Rem spread the evidence across his desk like pieces of a dark puzzle. The timeline was becoming clear. Evangeline and Declan's relationship predated his marriage, possibly starting during that college scandal his mother had mentioned. The startups, the falsified records, his own position at the company, all carefully orchestrated pieces of their long game. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Knox? Your wife is here to see you. Send her in. Rem quickly tucked the documents into his safe, leaving only innocent paperwork visible. Evangeline entered, wearing an outfit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. Darling, you've been avoiding me. We need to discuss those papers. Which ones? Rem kept his tone casual. The adoption papers you left in the study, or the shell company documents you signed before our wedding? She faltered for just a moment before recovering her smile. I don't know what you're talking about. The adoption papers are exactly what they appear to be. I thought expanding our family would make you happy. Like you made my father happy? The words were soft, but they hit their mark. Evangeline's smile flickered. Your father's accident was tragic, but I don't see what that has to do with. Interesting choice of words. I don't recall mentioning an accident. Rem stood, moving around the desk. Tell me, how long have you and Declan been planning this? Since college? Or did it start when my father caught him selling company secrets? The mask cracked further. You don't know what you're talking about. Don't I? The shell companies, the false medical records, the convenient timing of my father's death. It all fits a pattern. The only thing I can't figure out is why you went through with the marriage at all. Why not just let Declan take over when father died? Understanding dawned in her eyes. You know about the trust. The Knox family trust, accessible only to blood relatives with legitimate heirs. That's why you needed me, isn't it? Declan was disqualified after his scandal, but a marriage to me, children with my name. You have no proof of anything. Her voice had lost its warmth, revealing the steel beneath. And even if you did, who would believe you? The trustworthy brother versus the charming family man? Please. Rem smiled, the same smile he used before destroying a business rival. You really think I've survived this long in corporate takeovers by being trustworthy? Every conversation we've had for the past week has been recorded. Every document you've touched has been copied. Even this conversation is being preserved for future use. For the first time, he saw real fear in her eyes. You wouldn't dare expose this. Think of the children. My children, he corrected her. Or should we discuss Dr. Blackwood's involvement in their birth records? Evangeline's composure shattered completely. If you think you can threaten me. Threaten you? No, dear wife. I'm going to destroy you. You, Declan, your father, everyone involved in this conspiracy. But not yet. For now, go home. Play with our children. Enjoy the mansion. Consider it a preview of everything you're about to lose. After she fled his office, Rem called Sterling. How soon can you have that RICO case ready? Give me 2 weeks. Make it 1. They're getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Rem looked out his office window at the city below. It's time to set the final trap. The Knox Foundation Gala was in 10 days. The perfect stage for his counterattack. Let them think they had him cornered. Let them play their hand. He'd learned from his father's mistake. The best way to catch a snake was to make it think it was winning, right until the moment the trap snapped shut. The Knox estate gleamed under the evening lights, its colonial architecture providing the perfect backdrop for the annual Foundation Gala. Over 300 of the city's most influential figures moved through the grand halls, their conversations a steady murmur beneath crystal chandeliers. In his study, Rem adjusted his bow tie, watching the security feeds on his laptop. Sterling's team had installed additional cameras that morning, ensuring every angle would be captured. Everything's in place, Sterling confirmed through the secure line. Teams are positioned around the perimeter. Evidence packets are ready for distribution. Are you sure you want to do it this way? A snake only shows its true nature when it thinks it's won. Rem closed the laptop. They've spent years building their performance. It's time for the final act. Downstairs, Evangeline held court in the main hall, resplendent in designer silk that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. She played the perfect hostess, laughing at all the right moments, touching all the right arms. Only someone who knew what to look for would notice how her eyes kept darting to the study door, waiting for Rem to appear. Declan stood at the podium, rehearsing his keynote speech. The Golden Knox Foundation banner hung behind him, its motto etched in silver, legacy through honor. The irony wasn't lost on Rem. Daddy! Aurora's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway of his study, Sebastian beside her, both dressed for the gala. Mom says you need to come down. Uncle Declan's about to start his speech. Rem knelt before his children, straightening Sebastian's tie. I'll be there soon. Remember what we practiced? The twins nodded solemnly. They'd taken the news about their mother better than expected, perhaps because they'd sensed something was wrong long before Rem had discovered the truth. Children often saw what adults missed. Good. He hugged them both. Now go find Grandma Cordelia. Stay with her until I call you up. As they left, Rem took one final look at his father's portrait on the wall. Time to finish what you started, Dad. The main hall buzzed with anticipation as Rem descended the grand staircase. Board members, business associates, family friends, all gathered to celebrate the Knox legacy. None of them knew they were about to witness its greatest test. Evangeline intercepted him at the bottom of the stairs, her smile brittle. Where have you been? Declan's about to announce the new tech initiative. The one we discussed. The Shell Company initiative, you mean? Rem kept his voice low, watching her face. Or should we call it the trust fund acquisition plan? Her smile didn't waver, but her fingers tightened on his arm. Don't make a scene, darling. Think of the children. I always do. He removed her hand. That's why I've spent the last month thinking about how to protect them from you. Before she could respond, Declan tapped the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention. The crowd turned toward the podium. Declan cut an impressive figure, every inch the successful businessman. His confidence had always been his greatest weapon and his greatest weakness. The Knox Foundation stands for legacy, Declan began, his voice carrying across the hushed room. For 3 generations, we've built more than just wealth. We've built a dynasty. Today, I'm honored to announce our boldest initiative yet. Rem moved through the crowd, positioning himself near the stage. He could see Sterling's agents at their assigned positions, watches synchronized, evidence packets ready. But before my brother shares his vision, Declan continued, I'd like to say a few words about family, about trust, about the bonds that make us stronger than any individual ambition. Rem caught his mother's eye across the room. Cordelia stood with the twins, her face set in the same expression she'd worn at his father's funeral. She gave him a slight nod. And now, Declan raised his glass, I'd like to introduce the man who's been not just my brother, but my partner in preserving the Knox legacy, Remington Knox. The applause echoed off marble floors as Rem took the podium. Evangeline's smile faltered as she noticed the screens behind him flickering to life. Today we're discussing legacy, Rem began, his voice carrying the same authority that had destroyed countless boardroom opponents. So let's talk about how my wife and brother stole mine. The silence that fell was absolute. 5 years ago, Rem continued, as images appeared on the screens behind him, my father died in what appeared to be a tragic accident. Tonight, we're going to talk about why it wasn't an accident at all. Security footage filled the screens, grainy but clear enough to show 2 figures in the rain, examining the brake lines of a car. Gasps rippled through the crowd as timestamps appeared, matching the night of the accident. But that's just the beginning. Rem clicked through financial records, bank statements, falsified documents. Let's discuss the Shell Company's open the month before my wedding. The offshore accounts registered to a doctor who doesn't exist. The systematic theft of millions from this foundation. Declan stepped forward, his charm cranked to maximum. Brother, if you have concerns about the foundation's finances, we should discuss this privately. Like you discuss things privately with my wife? Rem's voice could have frozen hell. Or like you discuss things with my father before he died. More images appeared, letters, emails, bank transfers. The evidence unfurled like a poisonous flower, each petal more damning than the last. DNA tests. Click. Bank records. Click. My father's partial letter, now completed by documents found in my mother's attic. Evangeline started moving toward the exit, but Sterling's agents smoothly blocked her path. Dr. Theodore Blake, Rem announced, also known as Dr. Thaddeus Blackwood, my wife's father. A man who lost his medical license for falsifying records, who then created a new identity to continue his fraud. The man who helped orchestrate this entire scheme. The screens showed medical board investigations, license revocations, evidence of continued practice under false credentials. A planned seduction. Click. An engineered marriage. Click. Falsified birth records. Click. All leading to one goal, the Knox Family Trust. Declan reached the podium, his mask finally cracking. These are baseless accusations. But you made one mistake. Rem cut him off. You thought the Knox Trust was about blood. It's not. It's about honor. New footage appeared on the screens. Declan and Evangeline, the night of the accident. Phone records. Bank transfers. The sabotaged brake lines. 5 years of investigation. RIM continued. Every conversation recorded. Every document preserved. Every move you made, documented and verified. The crowd had drawn back, creating an island around Evangeline and Declan. The perfect stage for their final performance. Federal agents emerged from the crowd, led by Sterling himself. Declan Knox, Evangeline Knox, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and suspicion of murder. The Foundation's board members huddled in a corner, already voting to freeze all assets pending investigation. RIM wasn't finished. But this isn't just about justice. He nodded to the tech team, and new images appeared. The twin school play from the previous week. Watch your children perform, he told Evangeline and Declan. It's the last time you'll see them. Evangeline's composure finally shattered. What are you talking about? The custody papers you plan to trick me into signing? RIM's smile was razor-sharp. I had my lawyers convert them to termination of parental rights, for both of you. Fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, child endangerment. No judge in the country will grant you visitation. Those are my children. Evangeline lunged for the podium, her designer dress forgotten as security restrained her. No, RIM's voice cut like steel through her screams. They're mine. The DNA test you faked? I had it redone. Turns out your father's medical fraud extended to fertility treatments. The twins are mine, biologically and in every way that matters. The evidence continued to play behind him, years of conspiracy exposed in high-definition clarity. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Evangeline and Declan were led away in handcuffs, their masks finally, completely shattered. Hours later, after the last guest had left and the federal agents had finished collecting evidence, RIM stood in his study. The twins slept upstairs, safe under their grandmother's watch. The estate was quiet, cleansed of its poisonous secrets. He opened his safe, removing one final document, a letter found in the wreckage of his father's car, warning about the snakes in their garden. Justice, like truth, sometimes skipped a generation, but it never slept. Sterling appeared in the doorway. The RICO case is solid. They're looking at 15 to 20 years minimum. The Foundation Board has already voted to remove them from all positions and freeze their assets. And Dr. Blake? Picked up at his beach house an hour ago. He's singing like a canary, trying to cut a deal. RIM nodded, placing the letter back in the safe. Have your team sweep the house again. I want every trace of them gone before the twins wake up. Already done. Sterling hesitated. You know, most men would have handled this differently. More publicly, more emotionally. Most men never had to watch their father die for trying to expose the truth. RIM closed the safe. Most men never had to protect their children from their own mother's schemes. The mansion would need changes, new security, new staff, new protocols. But the Knox legacy would survive, stronger for having exposed its weakest links. The snakes were gone from the garden, their poison neutralized by the very trust they'd tried to steal. Today, the Knox estate houses a reform foundation dedicated to exposing medical fraud. The twins, now teenagers, thrive under their father's care, their mother and uncle serving lengthy sentences for crimes ranging from fraud to attempted murder. And in the study, behind the journals, RIM keeps one final paper, his father's warning letter, a reminder that justice, like the truth, may skip a generation but never sleeps. Epilogue. A decade later, the Knox estate stood prouder than ever against the autumn skyline, its colonial architecture restored to its former glory. 10 years had passed since the night of the gala, each one marking another step in cleansing the poison from the Knox legacy. RIM sat in his study, now brightened by large windows he'd installed after removing the old, shadowy corners where secrets once hid. The weathered oak shelves still lined the walls, but they no longer held deceptions, only history and hope. His laptop displayed the latest report from the prison monitoring system. Evangeline's 7th parole request had been denied. Her designer silks had long since been replaced by prison grays, her perfectly manicured world reduced to a 6 by 8 cell. The psychological evaluation noted her continued refusal to acknowledge her crimes, still insisting she'd been framed. Her attempts to contact the twins through various aliases had finally stopped 3 years ago, after Rim's lawyers threatened additional charges. Declan hadn't fared much better. His charm had worn thin in federal prison, especially after fellow inmates discovered his role in his father's death. Multiple transfers between facilities hadn't improved his situation. His last appeal had been rejected 6 months ago, the judges unanimously agreeing that the evidence of his crimes was overwhelming. Dr. Theodore Blake, the man who'd practiced as Thaddeus Blackwood, had died in prison 2 years into his sentence. His deathbed confession had revealed even more depths to the conspiracy, including details about other families he'd manipulated through falsified medical records. The Knox Foundation's Medical Fraud Investigation Unit had used his testimony to expose similar schemes across the country. "Dad." Sebastian's voice pulled Rim from his thoughts. His son stood in the doorway, 18 now, and bearing a striking resemblance to his grandfather. The Foundation board is waiting in the conference room. The twins had grown into remarkable young adults. Aurora was finishing her first year at Harvard Law, following in her father's footsteps with a focus on corporate fraud litigation. Sebastian, with his gift for numbers, had already started working part-time at the Foundation's forensic accounting department under Sterling's mentorship. "Tell them I'll be right there." Rim closed the prison report. "How's the new tracking system coming along?" Sebastian grinned. "We've identified 3 more suspicious medical practices using the algorithm. Sterling thinks we can have them shut down by month's end." The Knox Foundation had been transformed over the past decade. What was once a traditional family trust had become the country's leading force in exposing medical fraud and corporate conspiracy. The same detailed documentation that had brought down Evangeline and Declan now served as a training model for forensic investigators. Cordelia had passed away peacefully 2 years ago, but not before seeing her grandchildren flourish and the Knox name restored. Her final years had been spent helping other families affected by similar schemes, turning her pain into purpose. Sterling had retired from the FBI but stayed on as the Foundation's head of investigations. His RICO case against Evangeline and Declan had become required study at Quantico, showcasing how family fraud schemes could be uncovered and prosecuted. The old study vent, the one that had first revealed the conspiracy, had been preserved behind glass, a reminder that truth often came through unexpected channels. Beside it hung Rim's father's portrait, restored to its rightful place of honor. Maria, the housekeeper who had witnessed so much, still ran the estate with quiet efficiency. She'd been instrumental in helping the twins through the transition, providing stability when their world had been upended. Now she served as the estate's unofficial historian, preserving the lessons learned from those dark days. The manila envelope that had started it all, the fake adoption papers, was now part of the Foundation's fraud education program. Law enforcement agencies regularly requested copies for training purposes, learning how to spot similar schemes. Rim's marriage to Elizabeth, a federal prosecutor he'd met during the trials, had added new warmth to the estate. She'd approached the twins with patience and understanding, never trying to replace their mother but offering friendship that gradually blossomed into genuine family bonds. Their 3-year-old daughter, Hope, represented everything the Knox legacy truly stood for: honor, truth, and resilience. The investigation had rippled far beyond the Knox family. Several other prominent families had discovered similar conspiracies in their own ranks, leading to a nationwide crackdown on medical fraud and trust fund schemes. The Knox Foundation provided resources and support for these families, helping them recover both legally and emotionally. Patricia, Evangeline's sister, had eventually come forward with additional evidence about her sister's crimes. She now worked with the Foundation's Victim Support Program, helping other siblings cope with family betrayal. The twins' birth certificates, the real ones, hung in Rim's private office, alongside the DNA test results that had confirmed what he'd known in his heart. They were his children, in every way that mattered. The fertility clinic fraud had been an ironic twist, revealing that Dr. Blake's manipulation had inadvertently ensured the children were biologically Rim's despite the conspiracy. Janet, Rim's longtime assistant, had risen to become the Foundation's chief operating officer. Her quiet efficiency had helped rebuild the organization from the ground up, implementing safeguards to prevent future infiltration attempts. The annual Knox Foundation Gala still took place, but its focus had shifted. Instead of self-congratulatory speeches about legacy, it now honored whistleblowers and investigators who exposed medical fraud. The event had become a symbol of transformation, showing how tragedy could spark positive change. Aurora's research into her grandfather's death had led to the creation of a cold case unit within the foundation. They specialized in reviewing suspicious accidents involving corporate whistleblowers, ensuring that other families wouldn't have to wait a generation for justice. In the estate's garden, where Evangeline had once hosted her manipulative tea parties, there now stood a memorial, not to the past's darkness, but to the light that exposed it. The plaque bore the words that had become the foundation's new motto: "Truth endures, justice prevails." The Knox name, once nearly destroyed by treachery, had become synonymous with integrity and perseverance. Law firms sought Knox Foundation certification for their fraud investigations. Medical boards consulted them on licensing issues. Universities invited RIM to speak about corporate ethics and family governance. Behind the study's journals, in a specially designed safe, RIM still kept his father's warning letter. But it was no longer a reminder of betrayal. Instead, it represented the moment when truth began its long journey to the surface. The letter was now accompanied by a decade of thank-you notes from families the foundation had helped, each one a testament to the power of exposing deception. Evangeline and Declan's crimes had earned them more than just prison sentences. Their assets had been seized, their reputations destroyed, their social circles evaporated. Evangeline's prison counselor reported that she spent hours staring at old photos of the twins, finally experiencing the loss she'd planned to inflict on others. Declan had aged rapidly behind bars, his charm useless against the weight of his crimes. The old guard of the Knox Foundation Board had been replaced by experts in fraud detection and victim advocacy. Quarterly meetings now focused on prevention and education rather than mere profit. The trust that Evangeline and Declan had tried to steal had grown into something far more valuable, a force for accountability in a world of complex deceptions. As Rim walked to the conference room, he passed the wall of success stories, photographs, and letters from families the foundation had helped. Each one represented a conspiracy exposed, a truth uncovered, a legacy preserved. The twins had insisted on creating this display, understanding that their own story was part of a larger narrative of justice and recovery. The foundation's legal team, led by attorneys who had worked on the original case, had developed protocols for identifying similar schemes. These were now used by law enforcement agencies nationwide, creating a lasting impact far beyond the Knox family's personal tragedy. In the end, the conspiracy that had threatened to destroy the Knox legacy had instead refined it, burning away weakness and leaving behind something stronger. The snakes were gone from the garden, their poison transformed into medicine for others facing similar battles. Today, as Rim prepared to review new cases with the board, he caught his reflection in his father's old desk. The past decade had added silver to his hair and lines to his face, but his eyes held the same determination they'd shown on that revelatory night in the study. The truth had not only survived, it had thrived, growing into a legacy far greater than anyone could have imagined. Justice, like truth, had not only awakened, it had built a home in the Knox estate, its foundations deeper and stronger than any deception could shake. The next generation of Knox leaders would grow up understanding that legacy wasn't about blood or money. It was about the courage to face truth and the strength to protect it. The manila envelope that had started it all was now sealed in museum-grade preservation, a reminder that the smallest discovery could spark the greatest changes. Future generations would learn that the Knox name stood not for wealth or power, but for the unwavering pursuit of truth, no matter the cost. And in the garden where snakes once hid, flowers bloomed year-round, their colors a testament to the beauty that could grow from even the darkest soil, when tended with honor, nurtured by truth, and protected by unwavering justice.
This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy the story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Arthur, are you listening? You just need to sign the papers and we're finished. My wife, Annie, whom I've been married to for over 25 years, was speaking to me. I tried to pay attention, but her voice seemed to drift further away as her rant continued. It all began this afternoon when I came home from work. Annie sat at the table with a glass of wine and a determined expression. Unfortunately, she only had one glass, neglecting to consider if I might want one too, especially given the direction our conversation was taking. I sensed trouble brewing as I sat down. Without asking about my day, Annie plunged into the news that she was leaving me. She claimed to have found her soulmate, someone who made her happier than I ever did, rendering me no longer adequate. Despite her escalating volume, her words became increasingly distant to me. Our story followed a familiar pattern. We met in high school, stayed together, and welcomed our daughter Sally shortly after getting married. While she wasn't the primary reason we tied the knot, she was always part of the plan. Presently, we both held steady jobs, lived comfortably, and had managed to pay off our house, with some savings to boot. We frequently professed our love, took family vacations, and though our physical closeness had waned over time, we still found moments of closeness. I believed our love ran deep, and we were destined to grow old together until this afternoon. Annie's rant continued, her face reddening with each passing moment. "Arthur, look at me!" It became increasingly difficult to focus, but I turned towards her. "You need to sign these papers." She pointed adamantly at the documents before me. Her tone was demanding, yet I struggled to maintain concentration. It felt as though the room's brightness and color were fading, despite the kitchen lights being on. Internally, I was fraught with emotion, but externally, my body remained unresponsive. The longer I remained silent, the angrier Annie grew. The last thing I remember is her slap, though I couldn't feel the impact. I imagined it leaving a prominent red mark, but still I couldn't move, and the world seemed to darken around me.
It had been a long day. The drive home from university was delayed due to an accident slowing everyone down. When I arrived home, there was an eerie quietness in the house. The lights were on, Dad's car was in the driveway, but Mom's was nowhere to be seen. Upon entering the kitchen, I threw my bag and books on the ground. Dad sat at the table, motionless, staring into space. On the table lay an open bottle of Mom's wine and a mostly empty glass. In front of Dad were papers with numerous "Sign Here" tabs. Approaching Dad, I touched his shoulder from behind. "Hey, Dad." I anticipated a response, but he remained unresponsive. Walking around to face him, I was taken aback. His eyes appeared glazed, almost milky white, with traces of tears staining his cheeks. He wasn't blinking, and a trail of drool hung from his mouth, threatening to drip into his lap. Panicked, I called out, "Dad! Dad! Come back to me, Dad!" Tears welled in my eyes. With no response from Dad, I tried to calm myself. "Slow down, Sally. Dad needs help," I whispered to myself. Retrieving my phone, I dialed emergency. I explained that my father, Arthur Other, was unresponsive. After providing my details and address, they dispatched an ambulance, promising a 10-minute arrival time. I sat beside Dad, holding his hand, offering reassurance. This man had been my everything growing up. Despite his demanding job, he always made time for my school events, musicals, and ballet. He endured my early attempts at the violin, encouraging me every step of the way. On my 16th birthday, he surprised me with a Heidersign violin, not the best, but it held sentimental value as it came from him. Now, 5 years later, I was studying music at university with a focus on strings and violin, thanks to his unwavering support. As I waited, questions raced through my mind. Why was Dad like this? What had happened? And where was Mom? Glancing at the paperwork on the table, the words "petition for divorce" caught my eye. Shocked, I began reading, my skin crawling at the revelation that Mom wanted to divorce Dad for reasons unknown to me. It appeared highly likely that Dad's condition stemmed from the documents, especially considering Mom's open wine bottle, indicating she had given Dad the papers and left. People often speculate on the rapid fluctuation of emotions. I suppose they've never experienced such a betrayal. For me, any compassion and desire to be in my mother's presence faded away. Shortly after, the ambulance arrived, and I directed them in getting Dad onto a gurney and off to the hospital. After locking up the house, I followed behind, making calls as I drove. I contacted my grandmother, Dad's mom, his sister Rhonda, his best friend, and then his manager at work, informing them of Dad's situation and his impending absence. I explained that I found him unresponsive and that he was en route to the hospital. Everyone requested updates on his condition, and his manager assured me of arranging emergency leave and informing their boss. I knew I was putting off the next call, consumed with anger, but I felt compelled to call Mom. The phone rang, and she answered after a couple of rings. "Hi, Sally, my darling, how was your day?" I was taken aback by her casual tone. Surely she couldn't be so naive as to think I wouldn't know what was happening. It had been almost an hour since I found Dad, and Mom was well aware of my routine. "Where are you, Mom?" "I'm out and about, sweetie," she trailed off, sensing my inquiry. "So, in other words, you've just shattered my father, your husband, and left him without a second thought." "Oh, no, darling, I tried to explain to your father about Paul and the situation, but he wasn't responsive, so I thought it best to leave and let him process that we won't be living with him anymore." Her attempt to downplay the situation infuriated me. Given Dad's state, it seemed more likely that she had ripped his heart out and left it shattered before him. "It appears to me like you abandoned him when he needed help. Are you truly that heartless? Do you even understand what's happening now, or do you simply not care?" Anger began to seep into my voice. "Sweetie, don't get angry now. I understand this is a shock, but your father will be fine. I'm only asking for what is rightfully mine and some support while Paul and I wait to marry." Yep, my mother was firmly in La Land. "Angry? You haven't seen angry yet, Mother. And just so you know, I'm currently following Dad to the hospital. He's in an ambulance, and when I got home, he looked like he'd had a stroke." "Oh, Sally, my sweetie, I'm sorry to hear that, but—" "No excuses, Mother. Let me ask you, is this Paul you're running off with the same Paul from your work that you keep talking about?" She hesitated. "Of course, darling. Paul, the man from my mother's workplace she never stopped mentioning. So, let me get this straight. He's a dozen years younger than you, and you've been having an affair with him for how long?" Again, she hesitated. 6 months. "Right. So for the last 6 months, you've been involved with someone from your workplace behind Dad's back. You've been lying to Dad and me, hiding your affair. I had no idea you were capable of such deceit, and clearly neither did Dad, judging by the state you left him in. How did you expect either of us to react?" "Well, I suppose not positively at first, but once we're living with Paul, you'll see we're meant to be together." "We?" She had just referred to we for the second time. Did she expect me to abandon Dad to move in with her and her boyfriend? I could feel my anger boiling over. I knew I would say something regrettable if I didn't stop. I'm going to hang up now before I say something I might regret. But let me be crystal clear. I will not be leaving Dad, and there's no way I'm going anywhere near Paul, let alone moving into the place you and he are cavorting in. "Sally Other," my mother responded sharply. "I am your mother, and I will not be spoken to like that, regardless of how upset you are." "Then I guess we're done talking." I hung up before she could say anything else. If she thought I would condone what she was doing, she had another thing coming. She tried calling me back multiple times, then started calling Dad's phone, which was silly because if he could, I doubted he would pick up a call from her. Since I had Dad's phone with me, I ignored any calls from her. By the time I reached the hospital, the ambulance crew had admitted Dad, and he was in a ward under observation. Aunt Rhonda had arrived and informed me that she had also received several calls from my mother, but wasn't sure what was happening other than her brother being in the hospital. When I explained the situation, Aunt Rhonda turned a deep shade of scarlet, almost as if steam were coming out of her ears. "Sally, do you have the documents that woman left for my brother?" "Sure, Aunt Rhonda. Here you go." Aside from being my aunt, Rhonda was also our family attorney. For the next hour, we sat beside Dad as Rhonda read through the documents, occasionally muttering under her breath. Doctors and nurses came in and out of the room periodically, checking on Dad. "Well, the bad news is that your mother is going to get her divorce from your father. The schedule outlined here shows that this process has been in motion for over 2 months and had to be served this week, or it would have incurred significantly higher fees from her legal team." I shrugged. I had heard enough justification from my mother. I was determined to ensure that she and Dad separated for what she had done. It was strange. I was never particularly close to my father, always looking up to my mom, but her actions seemed plain foolish. This whole mess seemed to be orchestrated by Paul, her so-called soulmate. Regardless, Mom and Dad weren't going to weather this storm, especially if Dad's current condition was any indication. The good news is that she hired a shyster of a lawyer to represent her. She's going to have to shell out a hefty sum just for the divorce, and even more if it goes to court. Rhonda grinned. Meanwhile, my dear brother has the best lawyer in town, and he's getting the family discount. We shared a smile for the first time that evening. Additionally, some of the claims here, like wanting 50% equity in the house and 60% of the financial assets, along with spousal and child maintenance, are likely quite exaggerated. I assume from your reaction that you're not planning to live with your mother. I shook my head in confirmation. Good. Okay. I have some initial thoughts. However, we need to see what happens with your dad over the next 24 hours. Your mother could already be in hot water for abandonment and mental cruelty. The next few days flew by, with doctors constantly checking on Dad. Physically, he was fine and healthy, but he remained unresponsive. I managed to continue my university studies in the hospital chair by his bed, laptop and textbook in hand. Occasionally, a family member would relieve me, allowing me to go home, catch a few hours of sleep, and return. I'll admit, I shed a few tears at home, alone in the house. One of the most surprising moments during Dad's hospital stay was when Tina Williams, the owner of the company where Dad worked, paid him a visit. While I knew Dad's manager, Tom, I had never met Tina herself. Tina was a striking woman, curvaceous without being overweight, with tan skin, dark raven hair, and mesmerizing blue eyes that could make any person, male or female, swoon. As it turned out, Dad had been part of a group at his workplace that had supported Tina a few years back during her messy divorce. Her unfaithful ex-husband had attempted to claim a significant portion of their savings and nearly succeeded in taking half of her business. Dad had introduced her to Aunt Rhonda, who had successfully protected Tina's assets, ensuring she didn't lose any business shares and securing child support for her then 6-year-old daughter. Tina visited Dad several times, expressing shock when I briefed her on the general summary of why he was hospitalized. She brought cards from everyone at Dad's workplace and spent time holding his hand, sharing stories from the office. It turned out Dad had a knack for humor in the workplace, and his absence was deeply felt by his colleagues. I should mention that Dad is an accountant by profession, working for one of the financial clearinghouses that assist banks in processing payments to financial institutions. While the work may be tedious, Dad apparently brightened up the workday for everyone with his humor and presence. About 2 weeks later, I returned from a shower and a nap at home to find Rhonda and Tina in the midst of a conversation. Although it seemed a bit heated, their frustration was aimed at my mother rather than each other. It turned out that my mother had sent a demand letter to Tina, requesting access to all of Dad's bonuses from the past few years. It didn't matter that the bonuses had already been paid out. The letter demanded that she receive 50% of them within 30 days into a designated bank account, or she would pursue legal action against Tina. Besides the absurdity of her claim for money already dispersed, it seems like she and her new partner are in dire financial straits since I've frozen all the joint assets while Arthur is incapacitated, Rhonda remarked, sporting an exploitative grin. I chuckled, making my presence known. Yes. This morning I received my first communication from Mom in 2 weeks. A text message asking if I could lend her a few $1,000s. I haven't responded because I'm still pretty upset with her. I mean, she hasn't even asked about Dad since I told her what she did to him. Over the past couple of weeks, Tina had become fiercely protective of my dad. Whenever my mother was brought up, Tina's eyes narrowed, her voice dropping in pitch, indicating her deep disdain for Annie Uther. It was as if I could see sparks flickering around her smoldering eyes. I just hoped she never had to be in the same room with my mother, otherwise I feared she might incinerate her on the spot. Despite my current feelings toward my mother, she was still my mother. She has destroyed the most wonderful man. Sally, if it weren't for your father, I wouldn't have my Clarice or my business. So many people in the office helped me during one of the lowest points in my life. but your father took the time to listen to me. He never judged my ex-husband or me. He just let me talk. No one has ever done that without offering an opinion. He introduced me to your aunt here, ensuring I was taken care of. If he were single, I would have pursued him with everything I had after my divorce. I shrugged and let a smile grace my face. He won't be married much longer. Their faces registered realization, and Rhonda giggled while Tina smiled. Thanks, Sally. I needed that. I still can't believe what your mother has done to him or that she discarded such an amazing man. I need to head back to the office, but before I do... Tina walked over to my dad, and as Rhonda and I watched, she bent down and gave him a tender but sincere kiss on the lips. She looked up at us and smiled. However, her smile quickly turned into shock when my dad emitted a groan.
As I gradually woke up, I sensed soft lips on mine, just the right amount of pressure, conveying a gentle and tender affection I hadn't felt in a long time. The hospital room's beeping and my groans reminded me of my surroundings. Anticipating Annie's presence as I opened my eyes after that affectionate kiss, I was surprised to find Tina standing there with a smile on her face. "Tina?" Approaching from the other side of the bed, Sally and Rhonda joined us. "It's okay, Daddy. You're going to be okay, you hear?" As my memories caught up with me, I realized Annie was leaving me or had already left. What happened? Over the next few minutes, the three of them filled me in on how Sally had found me unresponsive, called an ambulance, and discovered the divorce papers, revealing Annie's months-long infidelity. I learned how Annie had threatened Tina once Rhonda froze our finances until they could determine my condition. "How long?" 2 weeks, Arthur," Rhonda replied. I turned to Tina. You kissed me?" Tina blushed. "Yeah, sorry, I was about to head back to the office and was saying goodbye." I smiled. "No, it's okay. I guess I'm on the market, so I think it's okay." Over the next few hours, various doctors came through, conducting physical checkups, blood tests, and more. Tina canceled her visit to the office and stayed, along with Rhonda and Sally. Among the doctors was a psychologist. As he probed into my experiences, I recounted finding Annie alone, drinking, and her announcement of leaving me. I described how the world seemed to lose color, and sensory input became disjointed, making it difficult to move despite growing upset. My last memory was of Annie slapping and yelling at me, her words incomprehensible. The girls collectively gasped at the revelation of Annie's aggression, while I was unable to respond. "Dad, what time do you think it was when you became unresponsive?" "I'd say it was around 5:30, baby." "Why?" "Because it was past 7:30 when I got home and found you, and there was no red mark on your cheek. So I assume Mom must have left you there alone for quite some time." The psychologist interjected. "It's not uncommon for someone in your situation to experience misuse while unresponsive. In your case, I'd say you went into shock upon hearing your wife's declaration of leaving you. Although this is a much more extreme case than usual, it does make sense." Rhonda added, "When Arthur was young, there was a bully a few years older than him. He teased Arthur quite a bit, and one day a neighborhood parent found Arthur lying on the ground in a local park. Our parents put him to bed, and he woke up the next morning. It wasn't overthought, as he woke up regularly the next day, but it did happen. I remember Billy pushing me around and teasing me in the park. After a while, I didn't know what happened, but when I woke up, Mom and Dad told me I had passed out and someone brought me home. When I told them about Billy, they spoke to his parents. The next day, Billy came up to me at school and apologized. I chuckled at the memory. I don't think he was sincere, but he never bothered me again after that day. "I believe we may have a precedent here," the psychologist mentioned. "In many ways, the mind remains poorly understood. However, if something similar has occurred before, it's plausible it could happen again." I frowned. He reassured. "I wouldn't worry too much. With the love and attention of these 3 lovely ladies, even if something were to happen again, I believe you will be well taken care of." We conversed for a few more minutes before he excused himself. I also found myself fatigued, which might seem odd for someone who had just slept for the past 2 weeks. But I was. So I sent all 3 girls home to rest, and informed them they could visit me tomorrow to ensure I was all right. Over the next 2 days, I eased back into life. Tina brought me a work laptop and a few simple tasks to complete with instructions, only if I felt bored. Rhonda visited primarily to review her revised divorce documents and to have me sign some papers so she could proceed with ending my marriage to Annie. Rhonda also brought along a young detective, Karen Hill. Detective Hill conducted an hour-long interview with me regarding my experience that night with Annie. She thanked me and informed Rhonda and me that her report would be ready in a few days. I wasn't certain if we were planning to file a complaint against Annie. Eventually, however, Rhonda instructed me to leave everything to her, kissed me on the forehead, and departed. On the second day afternoon, after waking up from what Sally dubbed my checkout, I was discharged to return home. Sally accompanied me, and I was surprised to find Tina waiting at the door. She assisted Sally in guiding me to her large suburban SUV. Tina stayed for dinner that night. We opted for takeout, and she pitched in to clean up before staying to watch TV with us for a couple of hours. When she left, Sally hugged her and made sure I walked her to her car. "Tina, thank you so much for everything you've done these past few weeks. I don't know how I can repay you." "Well, in a few weeks, when you're feeling back on your game, you can take me out for dinner and dancing." I blushed. Here I was, just an afternoon out of the hospital, and the woman whose kiss had awakened me was asking me out. But she was attractive, and according to Annie, I was to be a single man again. "Okay, next Friday night after work. That gives me almost 2 weeks to get myself back to normal." She nodded and gave me a warm hug. It lingered a little longer, and I sensed a deeper meaning. As she got into her car, I found it amusing that for a moment I wondered about the name of the woman I had been married to for almost 25 years. For the next few days, Sally, Rhonda, and Tina hovered around me, ensuring I was all right. It was comforting to be cared for in such a way. However, the news Rhonda brought me that Friday afternoon caught all of us a little off guard. "This afternoon, Annie got arrested," she announced. "What happened?" I inquired. "Well, after your statement to the police at the hospital, they issued an arrest warrant for Annie on grounds of mental cruelty to a person with a disability. This is because you were mentally disabled and unable to defend yourself at the time. Also, she left you unattended for an unspecified period, which adds to her troubles," she explained. "What does this mean for the divorce?" Tina, who had joined us again for dinner, asked. That evening, she had her 8-year-old daughter Clarice with her, who was watching a Disney movie in the lounge room while we conversed. With Monday marking my return to work, Tina would see me then. However, I was starting to grasp that she was seeking more than just an efficient number cruncher in the office. I found myself not objecting to the idea of Tina and picturing her, contemplating what lay beneath those nicely fitting clothes she wore whenever she visited. Rhonda grinned. "It's likely going to tilt a few things in Arthur's favor. I'm advocating for a 50-50 split of the bank accounts in the house. I know we could aim for more given the circumstances, but I reckon Arthur would want to be fair." I nodded. "Annie won't be able to touch any of the bonus money she tried to extract from you, Tina. I filed a case against her for extortion alongside the mental cruelty charge. It won't do much except prevent her from accessing what isn't rightfully hers. She'll probably be out in a couple of days, none the worse for wear, and likely back with her wretched soulmate. What I aim to do is expedite the divorce using Arthur's hospitalization and recovery as a pretext. Then, depending on her reaction, I have plans in motion. I'll ensure Arthur doesn't lose anything he shouldn't," she said, smiling. "So, how long will the divorce take, Aunt Rhonda?" Sally inquired. "Assuming everything goes smoothly, it should take around 3 months. After that, if Annie decides to contest anything, I'll bring in reinforcements, which will prolong the process but inflict more damage on her," Rhonda explained. That evening, as I escorted Tina to her car, Sally assisted Clarice into the back seat of the large Suburban. Tina embraced me once again and surprised me with a quick kiss, reminiscent of the other day. "Arthur, I know you're married, and you're a man of honor, so I won't rush things. But I want to lay claim to you now and let you know that I desire you. I've wanted you for a long time, of course, but I'd never pursue a married man or disrespect someone's marital vows. I've experienced that myself, and I wouldn't want to inflict that on someone else, even if their marriage is in trouble," Tina expressed sincerely. For a moment, I gazed into her deep blue eyes, brushed a strand of her dark hair from her face, and then leaned in to kiss her. Instead of a tender kiss, it became one filled with passion, lasting perhaps 30 seconds. I sensed the mutual connection between us. When I pulled back, Tina's eyes were the assets. He was feeding her lies, and deep down, she must have realized it after so many years of marriage. As her settlement demands grew more absurd, Rhonda had a single conversation with Annie's lawyer, and whatever was said put an end to all objections overnight. Tina and I went on dates every Friday night while Sally began babysitting Clarice, picking her up from school and looking after her, giving Tina and me time for dinner, coffee, and entertainment. Though we never went beyond holding hands and kissing, I had a feeling the night my divorce finalized would be unforgettable. Back at work now, things were going smoothly. While we were a successful financial organization, we weren't in the big leagues. We all did our jobs, were well compensated, and enjoyed each other's company. I think the staff caught on to Tina and me becoming an item at some point. Although everyone was happy for us, I had to dial back my usual antics. My direct manager, who reported to Tina, made sure to remind me of appropriate workplace behavior, considering I was essentially dating his boss. About 3.5 months later, we received a notification that the divorce would be finalized 1 week from the upcoming Thursday. There were no court proceedings. However, Annie had requested a meeting to discuss matters before the final decree. I agreed to meet the day before, and we arranged for her to visit the house to speak with both Sally and me. I had taken the afternoon off from work and prepared lamb chops and gnocchi in a burnt butter sauce for the three of us. It was a favorite meal for all of us, and I hoped it would help ease any potential awkwardness during our conversation that evening. Sally arrived home around 5:30, went to shower and change, and just before 6, the doorbell rang, signaling Annie's arrival at the front door. I haven't described Annie's appearance in some time, but perhaps I should now, with a before and after perspective. Before everything unfolded a few months ago, Annie was an attractive mid-40s housewife. She had cropped, shoulder-length brown hair, a curvy figure typical of a mother, and although carrying a few extra pounds, she was still quite attractive. With a well-proportioned 34C bust and an appealing rear, she was an attractive wife. Unfortunately, the woman standing before me now was almost unrecognizable. Annie had gained a significant amount of weight, developed jowls under her chin and puffy cheeks. Her stomach, which had previously had a slight mom belly, now sagged over her pants, and her once curvy posterior had expanded. Furthermore, she was dressed in loose-fitting clothes that concealed even more. Now, I have nothing against people of larger size, but that wasn't the Annie I knew. I think my surprise at her physical transformation was evident on my face, although Annie made no comment about it, merely grimacing in response. Hello, Annie. Please come in," I greeted as we entered the kitchen. I offered her a glass of wine, which she accepted, and we engaged in small talk for a few minutes. She inquired about work and my well-being, while I skipped the inquiry about her health. "It's what Paul wants. He didn't like how thin I was, so we've been working on bulking me up," she addressed the unspoken question. I frowned. For over 25 years, I had cherished this woman. Despite her actions, a lingering concern for her health remained, albeit greatly diminished. "You don't approve, do you?" She looked at me. "No, Annie, I don't. When we were together, you were a healthy size. But I'll be honest, I'm taken aback by your appearance. You don't seem well, and if I weren't so hurt by what you did, I'd be more concerned about your health and try to help," I expressed. "But you don't care, do you?" Her expression fell. "You and Sally, you're happy and healthy without me here." "Well, there's a part of me that cares, but when you walked out of here and practically left me for dead," I trailed off, shrugging while she sighed. "I deserve that. I did a terrible thing, didn't I?" "No, Mother," Sally interjected, appearing fresh from the shower. "You did a freaking horrible thing. You single-handedly tore apart a happy family, then walked out without a care in the world. And I, for one, can't understand why Dad agreed to let you come here tonight." "Sally, calm down," I intervened. "Your mother knows the situation we're in and how unhappy we all are. She requested this meeting tonight, so I thought the least we could do is be mature and hear her out." Sally wasn't pleased. As far as I could tell, like me, she hadn't spoken to her mother since that momentous day. The way my daughter was glaring at her mother, this situation wouldn't end well for anyone. It was time to steer the conversation elsewhere. Attempting a cheerful tone, I suggested, "Tough discussions aren't ideal right before dinner, so let's eat first." I served dinner, and though no one spoke, there were numerous glances exchanged across the table. Sally maintained a steady glare at her mother throughout the meal. After dinner, I cleared the table, and Annie requested to speak to Sally alone. "No way! You can say whatever you want to me with both of us present," Sally retorted firmly. I felt torn, but it was evident Sally was resolute about not being left alone with her mother. Annie seemed to sense that too. The look in her eyes mirrored what her mother had done to me on that fateful night. She acquiesced. Annie took a deep breath, hesitant to discuss matters in front of me, but she addressed Sally. "Well, Sally, I wanted to ask for your forgiveness for what happened that night. I didn't handle things properly, And despite everything, I don't want to estrange my daughter forever. Glancing at me, Annie added, "There's more, but I'd prefer to discuss it in private without your father present." "Sorry, Mom, but if you can't say it to both of us, then I don't want to hear it," Sally declared. Before Annie could respond, Sally stood up and left the room, slamming her bedroom door shut moments later. "I hope that would go better," Annie murmured softly, more to herself than to me. "I think considering the circumstances, it went rather smoothly," I replied, letting her know I understood. "Really?" Annie sounded surprised. "Yes, really," I sighed, continuing. "Annie, you need to realize that at this moment, nobody in this house holds much affection for you." She started to reply, but I raised my hand, signaling her to let me finish and lay everything out. "First, you engage in a long-term carnal affair with someone, then conceal it from both Sally and me. Next, you serve me with divorce papers out of the blue, and when I enter what Sally refers to as checkout mode, you proceed to yell, scream, and then slap me." Annie appeared stunned, like a deer caught in headlights. "Yes, I remember that, and I recall most of that time until shortly after you first slapped me. But let's continue. At some point, you abandon me when I am unresponsive, leaving me there until Sally arrives home and discovers me in the same state," I recounted. Annie's expression turned to panic. "When Sally calls you, you show no concern for me despite your daughter being visibly distressed about her father. You never once inquire about my well-being until tonight, make unreasonable demands of my workplace, and upon entering here, it's still all about you. You ask Sally for forgiveness, yet you have not apologized to her at any point." I paused briefly, hoping my words would resonate. "Yes, Annie, with all of that considered, I think things went quite well." Annie's gaze shifted to the floor, tears welling in her eyes. They hadn't yet fallen, but they lingered threateningly. I couldn't discern whether they were for Sally, myself, or simply a reflection of her own emotions. Continuing, I stated, "Now our divorce will be finalized tomorrow, and unless you have anything further to add, I believe we have fulfilled your request for a final meeting." I walked to the door and opened it. Annie glanced at me before exiting. Once outside, she turned to look at me. "Arthur, we did have some good years, didn't we?" "Yes, Annie, most of our time together was incredible. You were an exceptional lover, a devoted wife, and a loving mother. I'm not sure what this Paul character has done to you, but I don't see the woman I fell in love with in the person standing before me. All I see is someone who seems lost, manipulated into becoming overweight, self-centered, and caring more about what others can provide for you than the people themselves." Once again, she lowered her gaze to her feet. "You truly mean that, don't you, Arthur?" "Yes, I do," I affirmed. She turned to leave but hesitated, looking utterly broken this time. "Arthur, about the house. Paul told me I needed to ask." So that was the purpose of her visit. It wasn't about reconnecting with her family. It was solely about money. I chuckled, leaving Annie puzzled by my reaction. "Go tell your soulmate that you'll have your share of the savings and the equity from this house transferred to the bank account your lawyer provided to Rhonda by this time tomorrow. And Annie," she glanced at me, "protect that money from Paul or you won't have it for long. Update." The next morning marked the final decree, and Annie and I were officially no longer husband and wife. There was a small twinge of sadness within me, but it was fleeting. Mostly I felt content. The past few months had been challenging for everyone. Now, at 48 years old, I felt liberated, knowing I still had much life left to live. Rhonda phoned to inform me that pizza was on her tonight at my place. During lunch at the office, Sally dropped by. We reminisced about happier times with her mother when we were a complete family. Despite Sally's dislike for her mother, I could sense she missed the woman she once was. Truthfully, I did too. We shared many good years together. As Sally left, there seemed to be a silent exchange between her and Tina. Not long after, I was summoned to Tina's office. She closed the door and then kissed me passionately, as if the sun might never rise again. I must admit, I responded in kind. "Can I claim you as mine now, Arthur?" Tina asked. I felt a sore spot on my neck, likely from a bruise forming where she had just kissed me moments before. "I think you may have already done that." That evening's dinner was delightful, with Sally, Rhonda, Tina, and Clarice all joining in to celebrate my newfound freedom from Annie. Later that Friday night, after the girls were in bed, Tina and I consummated our relationship. I must have done something right because throughout the weekend, Tina seemed a bit sore whenever she sat down, but her eyes burned with a fiery passion that I knew was reserved for me alone. 6 months later, We tied the knot in a beautiful ceremony by a local lake, with many of our colleagues in attendance. Though we initially planned to marry later, we decided to move the date up to coincide with the arrival of Sally and Clarice's new little brother. Update. 5 years had passed, and Sally, her boyfriend Tina, and I were enjoying dinner at a local restaurant when 5-year-old Keegan posed a question. "Daddy, who is that lady who keeps staring at us?" Turning to look, we spotted Annie sitting across the room. She had noticeably lost weight and appeared discontent. Since the divorce, we hadn't seen or heard from her, and she hadn't attempted to contact Sally. Excusing myself from the table, I approached her. "Hi, Annie." "Hi, Arthur. How are you?" I inquired. She glanced down at her chicken salad, replying, "You were right, Arthur. You were right about him. Paul convinced me I was his soulmate, and you meant nothing to him. But when I didn't receive the money up front, he persuaded me to gain weight because he loved me and preferred overweight women. After receiving the divorce settlement, you advised me not to give it to him. But I didn't listen. He squandered it in 6 months and then abandoned me." Though I was still upset with her, her story lacked the happy ending mine had. "Since then, I've spent every moment trying to rebuild the confidence he shattered and reclaim some semblance of my former self," she confessed, holding back tears as she looked at me. After all these years, that look resembled the Annie I once knew. "Arthur, I am so sorry. I treated you horribly. I did it because I believed Paul knew things you didn't. I abandoned the man who truly loved me, leaving you unresponsive and—" She paused, gripping the table's edge. "You could have died because of my actions. I know you can never forgive me, but I want to apologize." Tears streamed openly down her face. Surprisingly, Sally had joined us, standing beside me, also witnessing her mother's apology. She gave me a weary smile, grabbed my hand, and extended her hand to her mother. Seeing Sally and then witnessing her extending her hand, Annie panicked, attempting to leave, but Sally blocked her path. "Mom, stop! You don't need to leave!" Sally asserted. Sliding into the booth next to Annie, Sally and I joined her. I glanced at Tina, who nodded in agreement. For the next hour, mother and daughter conversed. There were many tears shed, but for once, they were healing, not hurtful. Once they caught up, Sally and I reintroduced Annie to everyone else. Annie seemed a bit unsettled when introduced to Keegan as Auntie Annie. Following that day, we gradually welcomed Annie back into our lives. Sally and her mother reconnected slowly, meeting for coffee every week or two. Trust developed gradually between them, but eventually solidified. When Sally got married, Annie had the opportunity to play the role of mother of the bride. Tina occasionally invited Annie over for dinner at our house. Initially, I suspected it was to spite Annie for what she had lost, and Tina had gained by marrying me. However, while they never became close friends, Tina and Annie developed an odd sort of friendship that I never quite understood. Rhonda never forgave Annie for the injury she inflicted on me, although she remained polite when they encountered each other. With Tina's approval, Annie and I engaged in some post-marriage counseling. We addressed many of the issues from our past, spanning over 5 years ago. The counselor speculated that Annie might have been experiencing hormonal imbalances, but Annie vehemently rejected this notion. No, I threw away the most precious things in my life that day. I had a loving husband and a daughter who wanted to be with me. No hormonal imbalance can justify how I destroyed everything good in my life for someone who was nothing but trouble in bed and had an inadequate appendage, she remarked with a sweet smile directed at me. "Arthur and Sally deserve better from me," she admitted tearfully, dabbing her eyes with a tissue. "It took me 5 years to reconnect with them. I thank God every day that Arthur has allowed me back into his life. And Tina, too," she blushed, acknowledging Tina's warmth towards her despite everything. "She had every reason to hate me, yet she has always treated me kindly. I got lucky losing everything I discarded, and I will bear that burden for a long time." Annie gained more from those counseling sessions than I did. It was reassuring to confirm that neither Sally nor I were responsible for Annie's decision to leave us. And she was right. Tina had lifted us up and forged a stronger family bond. They say people pay for their mistakes eventually, and Paul did. He moved to another state and once again attempted to manipulate a married woman for her money. This time, however, the woman's husband caught Paul in the act and took matters into his own hands, rendering Paul incapable. The husband received a 10-year sentence, but if Rhonda's rumors were accurate, he might be released sooner. Tina and I are still deeply in love. I never imagined I could love anyone as much or as deeply as I did Annie, but Tina proved me wrong. She not only gave me her love, but also her soul wholeheartedly.
We continue to work together in her company, and I'm still in the same job. While we have our ups and downs, we always prioritize communication when it matters. Her physique remains remarkable, and we still make love frequently. We've even indulged in lovemaking moments in exotic locations while on vacation. Often, just one glance is enough to lead us locking the bedroom door and passionately indulging in each other.
Once, after we had finished making love, showered and dressed, we entered the kitchen to find Sally and Annie engaged in conversation. We had recently learned that Sally was expecting, sparking excitement as the girls discussed the arrival of my first grandchild.
My goodness, Sally, you'd think these two were teenagers with the way they behave. Tina, you'll have to let me in on your secret to keeping Arthur so lively.
Maybe I can get some tips to keep Fred on his toes, Sally teased. Amidst laughter, I blushed. Annie had been casually dating lately, but nothing serious until Fred entered the picture. Mom, let them be. We all know that Dad has been on a mission since... You know, Sally teased mischievously, her eyes twinkling. Annie hesitated while Sally laughed and Tina blushed. I simply leaned back, smirked at my girls, and felt myself stirred again by Tina's presence. Eventually, I excused myself, making my way back to the bedroom, with Tina following shortly after, locking the door behind her.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Even today, there are still rural counties whose main claim to fame is doing very little of anything. Life moves at a snail's pace because there are no factories, corporate offices, or tourist attractions. Just a series of nearly deserted downtown areas, one after another. These places are dotted with countless crossroads, remnants of a bygone era scattered throughout the landscape. Some of these counties are so impoverished and untamed that they provide the ideal setting for both illegal and legitimate businesses to operate, tucked away from the hustle and bustle of modern life. One of those tiny dots on the map is the crossroads town of Portage. It had never been a bustling hub of commerce, but it once boasted a small market, a farmer's exchange, and a service station. All of those businesses shuttered during the peak of the Walmart era, though the local restaurant managed to hang on, probably because even country folks need a meal now and then. The old service station eventually became a small hybrid of all the closed stores. At the Portage Market, you could fill up your gas tank, buy a pound of butter, or even find a screwdriver for sale. Chances are, you could also score a dime bag of pot if you knew where to ask. The former three-bay service station made for a passable country store, though it still looked very much like an abandoned service station with a minor facelift. Law enforcement in the area consisted of several sheriff's deputies who patrolled the county. Major crimes, however, were handled by the state police, as they would have overwhelmed the limited resources of the deputies. As I mentioned, Portage was just a speck on the county map, which hung on the wall at the county seat. Traffic in county seat would triple on the first Monday of every month when the circuit court was in session. Portage was simply a part of the larger, sleepy God, guns, and pickup trucks culture that politicians mocked during non-election years. Over the winter, residents of Portage noticed a woman visiting the old brick building several times. It had last been used as a small grocery store about 20 years ago. Her frequent visits suggested she was quite interested in the building, meeting with the realtor on 2 separate occasions. On the last of those trips, she brought along a man who looked like he might be her sugar daddy. The couple stopped for lunch at the Main Street Cafe, a holdover from the days when state roads connected the countryside, linking crossroads towns like Portage. Back then, cafes like this one sprang up along rural routes to serve the motoring public. Though the state had removed the highway designation from the road to Portage, the cafe still stood. The food at the cafe was fresh and tasty for the most part, provided you preferred simple, straightforward meals, just the kind of fare Fred enjoyed. As a retired enlisted Marine, Fred had never developed a taste for the finer things in life. On their first visit to the cafe, Fred and the much younger woman were on a mission, scouting locations for their business ventures. After having lunch, they met with the local realtor, then continued on to explore other potential sites. By the time they ate in the cafe again, they had decided that they would settle either in Portage or an equally small town several miles away. Since there were small buildings abandoned along many of the former state highways, their search had been long. The building in Portage would require the least renovation, and the price was right. It also was in a designated rural service zone for the ladies' business. Fred had waited until after a hard rain to decide which of the 2 buildings he would make a lease, with the option to buy offer. His motto had always been keep it simple, stupid, so that was his frame of mind at the time of his lunch with Kathy. He liked things simple because he was no spring chicken. He was a 55-year-old man with a 25-year-old daughter at his side. They had the lunch special on that early spring morning while they waited for the realtor to show. Fred could see the empty former grocery store parking lot through the window of the cafe. "Well, Daddy, what do you think?" Kathy asked. "I think your mama would be proud of you," Fred said. "Enough with the compliments. Which building are you going to lease?" She asked. "I guess it's the Portage and a Pear Tree," Fred said with a very infectious grin. "So are you going to miss the big city?" "For about 10 minutes. Besides, we can get into Lucille in 10 minutes. Lucille is everything we need. Well, I have lived in some pretty isolated places over the years, but you haven't. You might find you miss the variety available in a larger place. Trust me, colleges are pretty isolated. If not by miles, by attitude," she informed him. "Well, it should be interesting. You sure as hell are not going to get rich in Portage," he informed her. "No, I won't, but neither will you," Kathy said. "I don't have to get rich. My life is mostly over," Fred said. "Let's just move the conversation along," she suggested, smiling at her father. Kathy had tried to explain her career to him a few times. He just didn't get all the intricacies of the new ACA. She had a master's degree in nursing from the State University, so under the new medical system, she was entitled to operate a primary care clinic. She had explained 10 times that her clinic would be the entrance gate to the grounds of the medical establishment. She was like a security guard, she explained. She was there to help those she could, but also to send those who needed more help to the right place as efficiently as possible. For that she could bill the government a ridiculous fee. The government had provided the financing for the clinic. From the stories she had been told about her type clinic, she learned that the government never let them fail. They also never allowed them to make as much money as they had before the ACA. She was trading a government-financed and instantly approved clinic for a lot of money down the line. His business, unlike that of his daughter, was going to take longer to get a foothold. Nobody cared if Fred was a success or not. Unlike Kathy's clinic, the federal government had no vested interest in his success or failure. Kathy's clinic was up and running much faster than Fred's bike business. There were at least 2 good reasons why. One was simply the ACA promise of a huge improvement in rural medicine, so the pressure was on for clinics like Kathy's. The second reason was that Fred had more things to physically do before he could open. Kathy, on the other hand, just unlocked the door, unpacked the equipment which came with the plug-and-play package from the government. The price she paid seemed steep to Fred. He admitted that he knew nothing about the price of such things. So when Kathy told him the individual equipment would have cost if purchased separately, he believed her. The government most likely had no idea what the cost of the equipment was. They only knew that they wanted the clinic open. It was a campaign promise that every politician made. Improve healthcare and lower the cost. They were at least trying to throw money at the problem. 2 days after the clinic arrived on the back of a truck, it was open for business in a grocery store's parking lot. The availability of utilities quickly was one of the reasons the ACA administration approved the location so quickly. Meanwhile, the motor bicycle business was still in the building renovation phase. The 2 bathrooms were a mess, and only one of them was fully operational. Fred scrubbed the toilet and sink and thanked God that he had at least one functional toilet. The janitor's sink in the large storage room required a lot of cleaning, but it was also functional. Fred and Kathy had their 2-week anniversary lunch at the dinner. "So, Kathy, how is business?" Fred asked. "Well, it didn't start with them lining the parking lot, but I'm going to stay open for sure. There are enough indigent people in the county and enough EMS evaluations for sure to keep the doors open. I have treated 6 patients brought by EMS and forward just as many on to the ER at James County General. Strange that I get some of the gang members from Lucille 10 miles away. I have no idea why they would drive. All this was to visit a clinic with less equipment and services," Kathy commented. "I have no idea, but be careful with those punks. Most of them are high, and it doesn't take much to set them off. Some of them are just mean, and some of them are radicals. One is as dangerous as the other. So, what are you going to do about a place for us to live? Your little condo is too far away for us to keep commuting," Kathy said. "I'm not selling it for sure," Fred said. "It's paid for, and it don't eat." "Mind if I made a suggestion?" Kathy asked. "Could I stop you?" Fred asked her. "Probably not," she admitted. "That storage room you have across the rear wall, turn it into an on-call room. Most hospitals have something like it. We could both use it. We could easily fit a couple of cots in there. And a cabinet with a microwave and dorm refrigerator. I could actually build that. I have all these tools here, so why not?" he agreed. "I will need a plumber, since you need a shower." After that lunch, it took 3 more weeks before Fred even began working on a bike. He had amassed 30 broken or working bicycles and cardboard boxes of parts galore. Fred had a place for everything, and it was all in its place on the Wednesday, when he started on his first motobike. That was how he planned to market them. He also planned to push the limits, to squeeze the most out of the government rules and regulations on motor-assisted bicycles. Most everyone had come to accept that the actual motor could be run using more volts than the specifications suggested. They might run a year less than the 10-year estimates, but they performed better. The ampere pull of the engine had to remain within specifications to make sure there was no large overheating problem. His so-called assist motor was supposed to run at 24 V 30 amps, so the motors were rated at 750 watts. At 750 watts, the motors were legal by a good margin. Fred had experimented and found that the motor ran just fine on 36 volts and the 30 amps. At that configuration, they ran at a little over the federal regulations for total watts. That was the bad news. The good news was that the motor still met the 750 watt specification, at least on paper. Fred thought of the modifications as a supercharger. Fred hung his giant KISS sign over the assembly station and began work. Since mountain bikes had the strongest frame, his first bike was built on a red one. His plan called for a front hub motor, a battery pack mounted over the rear wheel. Otherwise, the bike would be a standard mountain bike configuration. Each of his project bikes were going to have a coded label attached. The code would advise him of the amount of money he had invested in each part of the bike. His first build had been purchases for $14 at a yard sale. His total work had been to remove the wheels and tires from the frame, clean it as best he could, and even put a cute sticker over a scratch. The wheels had light rust on the rims, but the tires were in excellent condition. The front one was almost perfect. The light rust came off with just a quick rub with a soft wire brush. The front tire went onto the new front wheel hub motor. Fred fitted the electronic onto the motobike and then added the off-the-shelf rack over the rear wheels. He didn't like the way the rack attached, so he decided that it would be the last off-the-shelf he purchased. He made notes on the price of the hub motor and the price of the off-the-shelf rack before he turned his attention to the batteries. Like everything else, Fred built his own batteries. He had learned to build battery packs on one of his assignments. He was in charge of a guard detachment on a radar station in the Arctic. The Marines guarded a new kind solar array, the panel. It had been new and super secret technology 15 years before, but the battery technology wasn't any longer a secret. The batteries weren't the new lithium designed. They had been a GAP battery. The GAP 15 years earlier had been an experimental lightweight, inexpensive nickel battery. When lithium hit the market, the nickel battery was doomed, except as a lightweight standby battery in electronics. The demand was limited, so the technology was passed over for years. The thing about the nickel batteries was they could be left on standby, with only a trickle charge. They could be left like that for years without any damage. It made them almost as effective as the lithium, if care was taken to refresh them before use. Fred found a recycle company willing to sell him the batteries from junked-out government equipment. He had to take the batteries as is. He got a good enough price to buy 20% more than he needed. When they arrived, he found that the batteries would no longer hold the top-end charge amount, but they would hold the lower charge just as long as they always had. Instead of the 1.35 volts per cell, the never-used batteries had a top end of 1.3 volts. His 12-volt build had 11 cells instead of 10. Otherwise, the performance was about the same. The weight was a 60% less than a traditional lead-acid batteries, but they weighed 25% more than a lithium battery. He had no idea what the life of the battery was going to be. He kept his supplier and the formula for building the packs a secret. He did not intend to have his supply of useful batteries diminished by the competition, should any arise. Since the first bike that Fred built was on a mountain bike frame with the standard suspension, he had to modify the suspension to accept the hub motor. The rear wheel mount would have required more finesse, and Fred was a sledgehammer kind of guy. He tested the mountain bike, then made a few adjustments. It had been built in less than a day. He put it on the web for sale at $800 without a battery or $999 with a 12-ah battery. It was a fair price. When everything was added up, the code told him he had $600 in the bike. It was a lot, but it was a bike that could be sold for almost $1,000. Of the two of them, Kathy was the first to begin work. She was also the first one to open for business. Not only that, she was also the first to hire an employee. She hired a local man as a receptionist. His name was Roger. Roger was thin and very clean. He was also very effeminate and slightly black. Roger, this is my father, Fred. Daddy, this is Ralph Samuelson. He's going to be answering our phones, keeping our calendar, and helping out at the clinic. Hello, Ralph, welcome aboard, Fred said, trying to set his tone on the friendly side of professional. He didn't care for Ralph's obvious lifestyle, but that wasn't his affair. Ralph went to work immediately. He took calls for the clinic so that Kathy could concentrate on her patients. Even though she had said he worked for both of them, Fred knew better. A couple of days later, Fred began work on a second bike. For his second build, he used a motor which was brand new, but designed for a large electric motor scooter. It was 24V 700 watts, and it required him to build a custom mount. He had designed and built one before in his workroom inside the condo. That workroom he emptied to give Kathy a place to hang her clothes and get away from the clinic where she did her residency. Fred and Kathy had reconnected after years of little or no contact. Her mother had kept them apart for reasons he didn't really know or understand. One day, Kathy just showed up at his condo door and demanded she be taken to dinner. She had chosen the town where Fred resided to do the clinical part of her training. He lived in the town because it was close to his last duty station. When they reconnected, he was in the final stages of retirement and was also floundering about. Kathy and Fred hit it off instantly. They turned heads wherever they went. Kathy was a young thing with flaming red hair which caught everyone's eye. She also dressed in the new punk-style clothes which her father did neither understand or approved. Fred, with his iron gray hair and ramrod straight back, was almost an accessory to her good looks. The girls, although he was such a perfect gentleman, and Kathy was such a punk, they were the real walking contradiction. After Fred got over trying to protect her and give her fatherly advice, they became good friends. She had slept on his sofa for a few months while she looked for a place. Finally, he decided to pack his tools away and allow her the use of his guest room. Fred knew that part of his appeal was his condo, which was located in a small town 20 minutes from the North Carolina's beach communities. Kathy loved the location, and she discovered that she loved her stick-up-his-butt father as well. They were good roommates as well. All that factored into her attitude when the hospital administrator for the even more rural County Medical Association came to visit her. She jumped at his offer of grants and low-cost loans. She didn't even discuss it with her father. While Kathy stitched up a knife wound, Fred mounted his homemade engine to the badly used bike. His homemade bike had a motor turning a scooter while sitting on top of a custom bike. The wheel-on-wheel design was simple. It might not be perfectly efficient, but it was pretty damn good, he knew. You know, I planned to use you for a place to live near the beach. I was planning to stay a few weeks till I got paid a couple of times, then move out, Kathy said over dinner. Yeah, I knew, but what the hell? I needed a kick in the butt to get started in a new direction. Fred admitted. And to help you cut back on your drinking, she said. That's your mother talking. I had already stopped drinking, more or less. Fred informed her. The government payments have started to arrive. There is enough money to pay my receptionist and keep the door open for sure. I might even be able to start paying my share of the lunches, Kathy suggested. A $3 burger is the least of my expenses, Fred said. Are you alright? I keep forgetting you are in business as well. I get so caught up in my own shit, she said. Honey, I'm fine. I just like to see you worry a little, Fred suggested. I do worry, but not so much about your shop. If worst came to worst, I could expend the clinic into the shop, she said. So anytime you get tired of it or you get tired of me, don't hesitate to tell me, Kathy demanded. If that happens, I will tell you for sure, he said. He was sure that she could see the pride he felt. She had accomplished so much under difficult circumstances. You know, Dad, you never asked me where I went when I took off for a couple of days at a time, she said. Do you want me to ask? Fred commented. Well, I won't tell you, but yeah, I would like to know you care, Kathy said while she toyed with her French fries. You have that new nurse practitioner, who I haven't met, coming in tomorrow. I assume that means you are planning for more time to go to the beach. Is now the time to ask what your plans are? Well, Dad, my plan for now is to show the new NP the ropes, then spend some time catching up on my sleep. Kathy said. Good, you need it, he said. So enough about me, where are you on the bikes? She asked. I have my first one built, and I'm riding it all over hell. I have started the second type bike, and I will have it in production now that I have figured out the mount, he informed her. Good for you, Kathy said, and obviously meant it. Just then she got a call. James County Rescue has a delivery, she informed him. Then take the burger with you, he suggested. Kathy stood to walk away. You want me to get this? She asked. Call it a going-away present, Fred suggested. Okay, but I'm not going anywhere. It's your condo and your studio apartment in the meat locker, she said with a laugh. You need to go, he said. Now? Yes, I do. See you later, Kathy said as she turned again to the door. After lunch, Fred returned to finish his first Rhino bike. He named it that because of the motor and scooter wheel sitting on top of the front wheel gave the bike the profile of a rhinoceros. The bells on his front door tinkled, so he turned his attention to the person who entered. Hello there, he said to the middle-aged man who entered. Hello, I saw your ad on the local business line. I'm with the local TV station, he said. You mean Portage has a TV station? Fred asked with false wonder in his voice. In a way, we cover news from all over the eastern part of the state. Today I wanted to interview you. Well, I do if you were the owner, he asked. So, you were the one who got stuck with covering the old fart news, Fred commented with a grin. We like to call them stories with a local interest, he said, smiling. Come on, you do the happy news, Fred said. Hey, I will be happy to have you cover the story. Okay, I'll be back tomorrow with the cameraman, he said. You never told me your name. I don't watch much local news. Fred said. Ralph, he said. Everyone just calls me Ralph. Well, I'll see you tomorrow, just Ralph, Fred said. Fred drove his old pickup the 20-plus miles to his condo after he finished with the Rhino. He wanted a good night's sleep and a real shower before his TV debut. Ralph was right on time the next morning. They met at the diner where they did the off-camera interview conversation, then went right to the shop and began filming. So what kind of range do these bikes get? Ralph asked the inevitable question. Ralph, that is like a car. It just depends. In this area, with our standard battery, a 120-pound rider could get about a 20-mile ride. Trust me, that's about all you want to do on a bike like this. So are you going to demonstrate it for our viewers? Ralph asked. I'm going to go you one better. I'm going to have my daughter's friend demo it. He has never ridden one of my bikes, so you will either see how easy it is or how strong they are if he falls off it, Fred said. Needless to say, Fred was a little worried. He needn't have been. Kathy's receptionist took to it instantly. They waited while he rode down the main street of town, then turned and rode past them. I want it, he said when he got off. I'm serious. I can ride that to work. You realize we were going to edit that blatant commercial out, Ralph said. Since I'm not paying for it, you can do anything you want, Fred said. Ralph left with a smile. He had a story, so he was satisfied. You know, I wasn't joking, the receptionist said. I would really like one of these bikes. My boyfriend is driving me to work now. I would like a little more freedom. I'll tell you what, maybe we can work something out. Let me see what Kathy thinks. I know I would love to have a dozen of the bikes out there running around town. Cool. But I have the money. You don't need to work out anything, the younger man stated. We need to work a deal, then you can pick a frame, and I'll start work on it. Fred said. Frankly, I'm more interested in the advertising than the profit right now. So how about I do it for cost plus $100, and you allow me to use you and the bike in my ads, and to allow a small tasteful sign on the bike, Fred suggested. Sure, so what will it cost with all the discounts? The kid wanted to know. $300 plus the battery you decide to buy. You can save that much just by not having to buy insurance, Fred suggested. I'm sold, the kid replied. So go pick your frame, Fred said. It took a complete day to assemble the bike only because it was a one-off build. If he had been organized for a multiple bike build, he could have done 3 in the same amount of time. Fred also worked out a sticker design, but didn't have one ready since it all had to come by mail. He decided he could build a sign for each side of the bike, giving his website address, which he had arranged to be very simple to remember. He had wanted the picture of a rhino on the sign, but that proved to be too complicated. So he used a lightning bolt instead. Simple graphic for the first one at least. So here's your bike. I don't have any stickers, so when they arrive, I'm going to put 3 or less stickers on it, Fred said. Now decide on the battery size, and I'll have it ready by the end of day. You can ride the whole thing home. Fred said. Kathy's friend chose a 24-volt, 15-amp-hour battery. You are sure that will get me 10 miles on a full charge. Tell you what, on your next day off, ride the bike to the Interstate Plaza. The one with the Home Depot. It is 5 miles. If you can't get back, I'll come get you and build a bigger battery for you. Fred wasn't sure if the kid did it or not, but since he never heard from him, he just figured all was well. Kathy, who was a lot more computer savvy than Fred, copied the story from the local TV station for his website. She also put a video of her receptionist on his bike. It took another month, but Fred began to make a small profit. He was down a couple of grand, but he had turned the corner. Of course, Kathy was going great gun with her clinic. She needed a lot more money than Fred did to operate. He was glad to see the traffic in his parking lot for that reason. It had taken Friedery a few months to turn the corner, but he never doubted that he would. In the geographical area where he was located, the motobike would have to be a hit. The number 1 reason was that he was in a good flat area. The number 2 reason was that he was in a position to offer service and a guarantee. The third reason was also geographic in nature. It was the weather, of course. The weather at the coast was warm enough to ride every day. Some days one might get wet, and a couple of days there was a damn cold, but it was never so wet or so cold that the bike wouldn't perform, with the exception of a hurricane. Hell, he even offered a roadside assistance program for the buyer who wanted it all and was willing to pay for it. There were only 2 of those purchased in the first 6 months. Most people bought the bikes for basic transportation. Once there were a few motos on the road, the business grew steadily. The $499 stripped-down Rhino model was the bike of choice of the college kids and the working poor. The batteries Fred built carried a 1-year guarantee because the cells were expected to last 2 years. If they had been new, they would have had a 2-year guarantee from the manufacturer. Fred had been bidding on the battery lots from the government himself lately. He won a few auction, which meant there was a battery storage room outside the building. He He also sold a $39.99 battery charger. The batteries arrived at Fred's shop already charged, but he checked them anyway. He recommended that the bike owner not leave them on the charger more than 6 hours. He knew that they were probably safe on the standby mode of his charger for a couple of days. Since 6 hours was the time needed to recharge even a fully drained pack, it should be more than enough to recharge from any day's ride. He also recommended that if the bike could not be used over the last week, it be recharged till the green light came back. Usually that took no more than a half hour. That battery plan came only after Fred was sure the bike could be made well enough to be guaranteed for the full year as well. His will-on-a-will design was bulletproof. If the client was so inclined, Fred could get a heavier-duty set of wheels for a custom build. The custom builds would be few he expected. Fred even made himself a custom paint booth for shooting the bikes. If he repainted it, added a very few bucks to the cost of the bike. There were only 2 colors available for the repainting. One was a traffic cone orange that almost glowed in the dark, and the other was stealth black. The stealth black came with a custom 48-volt hub motor, rat rod. That mother was way too fast to be on the road, but some of the kids like to run around at 45 miles an hour on a bike. On the rat rod, the beefed-up wheels were standard because Fred didn't want to get sued. The 48-volt front-wheel hub motor came directly from China, as did the 48-volt rear hub motor he used. The 2 motor was the reason the bike would do 40 miles an hour or so. Also standard with the rat rod was a $19.99 price tag. Fred had built one rat rod to show to clients, but never expected to sell it. Their second spring arrived with Fred and Kathy both working hard, but also financially secure. Fred based his success on the simple method of accounting. When there was a lot of money left in the computer program, for the 3 consecutive months, Fred called the business successful. Kathy's success formula was simple. When she was able to stop drawing from the government loan account and start to repay it, and start to pay her father rent on her half of the condo and the space in his parking lot, she considered her clinic a success. She could relocate both her closet and the clinic by the end of the first year, but she was perfectly happy with the arrangement. Well, happy enough not to change anything. Fred was spending most of his days at the shop, so when she took a day off, she had the condo to herself mostly. She even brought men home with her. They were for the most part men she met on Wrightsville Islands. In the summer, they might be college kids. In the winter, they might be businessmen attending a convention. Either way, it wasn't difficult to attract them. To be honest, there had been only one of each, and they both had rooms in the motels where she met them. She also stayed there, but the point was she could have taken them home. The only man she did take home was a computer IT man. He had come to repair her computer system at the clinic. He did things to her she had never experienced before. He visited her whenever they happened to be available at the same time. Hell, she even called him to check his schedule. Fred didn't worry about Kathy not being home on time, since after 6 months, he lost track of her schedule. Even when he knew her schedule, he didn't know it. That was because things could change at the last minute. Fred's love life was even more complicated. His problem was much different from Kathy's. Fred was still on the very sunny side of 60. He owned his own business and had no medical issues. Well, no obvious ones for Kathy to find. So widows and divorced women of all ages were attracted to him. In the terms of his generation, Fred was quite a catch. Fred had also been called an inspired lover by more than one woman. He had no idea what exactly that meant, but assumed that it was a passing mark. Also in his favor was an inland condo within a 20-minute drive of the beach. It was also a 30-minute ride via motorbike. The shop was about the same distance further inland from the condo. After the first year, both he and Kathy were happy with their positions. Their day-to-day lives were enhanced by a woman who came in every 2 weeks to clean the condo and do the laundry. She worked a full day because Fred and Kathy were both slobs. On those days, Fred went home for lunch at 11 a.m., and Kathy either went or sent the receptionist at 2 p.m. Both Kathy and her father liked to be sure the maid was working. The two of them were not trusting people. There wasn't their Aunt Lucy. She was just a stranger from a cleaning service. She was sent by a service recommended to her for the clinic. The service also had contracts with realtors and other businesses. Fred and his daughter thought they had the world by the balls. That all came crashing down on a sunny Wednesday morning during the 2nd June since their arrival in Portage. Fred heard the siren pull into the parking lot. He didn't even look up from his build since ambulances pulled into the clinic all the time. He did look up when he heard the second siren still a few hundred yards and moving fast toward the clinic. It was a WTF moment for Fred. He moved quickly to his rear door. He walked carefully over the broken pavement of the alley. Once upon a time, that strip of asphalt had been meant for trucks to unload groceries at the market's rear. Since that time was long gone, the asphalt surface was cracked and filled with potholes. When Fred saw the two police cars in the parking lot with their officers standing behind the doors and looking toward the clinic, he knew something had gone all to shit. Fred recognized Kathy's car and her receptionist's motorbike parked to the side of the clinic. The ambulance was still in the parking lot along with one other SUV belonging to the CRNA who had joined Kathy's practice just the week before. Beside the police car, there were 3 unknown cars in the parking lot. Fred didn't think that the CRNA would last, even before whatever was going on happened. He pretty much knew that what was going on was a hostage situation. Rather than ask the police, Fred went back into the bike shop. Once he got there, he turned on the surveillance system's dedicated notebook. With the notebook and the 5 cameras, which he had mounted in the clinic himself, he was able to see all 3 rooms and the parking lot as well. The 5th camera was on the back wall of his shop and aimed toward the front. It gave a funnel-shaped view of his shop. While the cops were dicking around waiting for some special SWAT equipment, Fred had evaluated the situation. It appeared a patient or maybe a family member was holding everyone hostage. On the audio, he heard Kathy speak in a calm voice. "This man the ambulance brought in needs to go to a hospital. If not, he is going to die. You don't want that to happen," Kathy said. "It will just make all this worse. Why not let the ambulance crew take this man and get on their way? They are of no use to you. Nobody goes anywhere till I think this through, so just shut up, lady," the man who was slightly older than a teenager said. Fred checked the other 2 rooms of the clinic and found nothing. The treatment room did have a man laying on the table unconscious. Fred needed to get inside that clinic. With the cop cars in the parking lot, the situation was far past a stealth entry. He wondered why Kathy hadn't pushed the panic button. After the situation was resolved, he would check the history to see why the cops got notified before he did. The job at the moment was to neutralize the man with the gun. As Fred watched the phone in the clinic rang. "Yeah," the gunman said after it had rang 10 times. "Everybody is fine except for the guy the ambulance brought in. The doc says he needs to get to the hospital. Hell no, I'm not going to let them out." Fred could imagine what the cops were trying to do. They planned to drag the situation out. That was the protocol. For Fred, the fact that the protocol didn't mean shit. The protocol was not written by a man whose kid wasn't one of the hostages. Since that was the case, the protocol was useless. He didn't want to talk the a-hole out of the clinic. He wanted him to die in place. Fred used the military approach without the permission of the policeman in the parking lot. First, he killed all the power to the mobile clinic. He could do that since the clinic's power came through the main circuits of the old grocery store. It was part of why they had located the shop in an old building. Everything was on site. Adding the clinic was no more than rerouting some electric services that had gone to the freezer units when the building had been a grocery store. Fred just tripped the breakers. The inside power was gone, but the emergency battery-powered lights came on immediately. In theory, the lights would provide enough illumination for anyone in the clinic to reach the doors safely. Fred moved quickly to get into the clinic while everyone was in a state of panic and concern. He moved from his rear door to the clinic's rear. The trick to moving around a crime scene was to attack its weakest link, which was the positions guarded by the local police. He just calmly walked past the local cops like he was a state police detective. He went to the rear window of the clinic and pushed in on it. That particular window was held in by springs. On the outside, there were 2 hidden retainers. Once those were twisted, the window would fall in when enough force was applied. Fred did all the right things to get inside the clinic without making too much noise. When he was inside the building, it was in the end room, furthermost from the waiting room, where the hostages were being held. The gunman was so busy protecting himself from the door that he never realized he was in danger from his rear. Fred got within 12 feet of him, then shot him in the back of the head. Before the cops crashed the door, he put his Colt 1911 on the receptionist's desk. By the time the cops crashed through the door, Kathy was in his arms. He held her while she cried. After they waited to be evacuated, she said, "I knew you would come for me." "Of course, it's your turn to make dinner," Fred said. As the paramedics attended to the unconscious patient and the other hostages were safely escorted out, Fred stayed by Kathy's side, his arm wrapped protectively around her. Together, they walked out into the warm sunlight, the tension of the day finally beginning to fade. The police gave Fred a quick debrief, recognizing the intensity of the situation. They knew he had acted out of love and urgency, and while they had their own protocol, they couldn't help but respect Fred's bravery and determination. Kathy clung to Fred's arm as they walked back to his bike shop, feeling safe now that they were together. She glanced up at him, her eyes sparkling with admiration. "You were incredible, Fred. I don't think I've ever seen anyone move like that." Fred chuckled, pulling her closer. "I just couldn't let you stay in there. I had to do something." Back at the bike shop, Fred turned on the lights and set out a couple of beers from the fridge. They settled onto the couch, the day's events still fresh, but the immediate danger gone. Kathy leaned her head on Fred's shoulder, exhaling deeply. "You really are my hero," she said, snuggling closer. Fred kissed the top of her head, smiling as he looked down at her. "And you're my world, Kathy. I'd do it all over again if it meant keeping you safe." They spent the rest of the evening together, enjoying a quiet dinner that Fred had whipped up, simple, comforting, and exactly what they needed. Laughter slowly filled the room, pushing away the lingering shadows of the day. As they sat on the porch later, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and pink, Fred took Kathy's hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. "We make a pretty good team, he said, his voice warm with affection. Kathy smiled, looking up at him with a soft, grateful expression. "Yeah, we do. And I wouldn't want to be with anyone else." Fred pulled her close, and they sat together in comfortable silence, knowing that whatever challenges came next, they would face them side by side. In that moment, wrapped in each other's arms, everything felt right. Fred raised his beer. "To us, and to always having each other's backs." Kathy clinked her bottle against his. "To us," she echoed, her voice filled with love. And as the stars began to dot the sky, Fred and Kathy knew that no matter what happened, they would always find their way back to each other, safe, strong, and together. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comment section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.